Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku had the ability to control technology? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. It was a sunny evening in Minneapolis, and the vibrant rays of that golden light pierced through into a room from the gaps in the blue curtains, illuminating what could be seen as a desk, a stack of small books, and a couple of unopened packs of gum. This was a bedroom, and the double bed was lighted up too with the lines of sunlight that stretched and climbed the walls in a grid. A boy who had a head of vibrant blonde sat with his belly on his mattress, focused on a screen that was in front of his face. He was watching something on the laptop, a show that he had found online which was reflected off his big round glasses. "This animation is not that great," he said with a mix of disappointment and amusement. And I thought I would never ever miss that place so much," he grumbled as he closed the laptop, "and this plague." Pushing himself off of his belly, he fell onto his back and laid for a moment looking at the ceiling, seemingly to reflect. Removing his glasses and setting them off to the end table beside him as he rubbed his eyes. Wasn't that show an odd one? That show was weird. A man had reincarnated into an awfully generic isekai fantasy set in a pseudo-medieval world where he got himself a harem, a mansion, and a couple of sweet powers before he got to fight the big bad villain at the end of the story. But Alan never got to that point and had stopped watching just now about midway through the series. The initial charm had worn out, and he was just not interested enough to continue anymore. "Alan!" A voice called from the living room, muffled a bit by the walls. His arms halted in their movement and he seemed to hesitate to get up, unsure if he had been called. "Alan, come down quick." He rocked himself up and sat on the side of his bed as he grabbed his glasses. Hurrying to his feet, Alan almost tumbled to the door before he caught himself and jogged down across the hallway and to the stairs into the living room. He saw his father, dusting off the dirt from the old biker jacket as he shuffled to the front door. "What happened?" the boy asked confusingly. "Uncle Joey had a baby and he told me to come with him," his father stated with a little snort, also said he needed to be hugged because his feet won't stop shaking. Alan looked off to the side for a moment and frowned. "Uncle Joey? Who is that?" "You know, he's like a brother, I suppose." "You're not related," the man quickly dismissed as he caught his son giving him a bewildering look. Alan's curiosity was not sated by his simple explanation. "I'm sorry this is so abrupt, but I need you to hold down the house until I get back." "You're taking your old bike?" Don't worry about the old thing. I took the carburetor out and cleaned it yesterday." Alan's father zipped himself up and patted himself about to make sure the now tight jacket still fitted him. "I see." Alan nodded. "But did you check the brakes?" The man snorted lightly through his nose in confidence as he walked to the door, but stopped suddenly and stood in silence. "You forgot." Those brakes are fine," his father defended. "Old discs have the refinement of a paving stone. I'll die before I need to replace one of those." "But don't they suck at stopping?" Alan insisted with a slightly raised voice and pitch. "That day may come sooner than you dash." Papa, don't be so grave when I've already made you dinner." His father wagged a finger before he pointed toward the kitchen behind the boy. "You see that pot?" "Yeah, chicken soup." Alan turned to see that the kitchen was left in a mess, and a single pot of what he made out to be chicken soup was left on the stove still running. "You will need to watch that for about 2 more minutes, then after that, you're free to call Emily and Eric to dinner." Alan bolted his head back around to see that his father was already outside the door. "Oh, don't forget about the dogs." "Wait, Dad dash." And the door slammed shut, leaving Alan with one finger pointing as he stood quiet. Biting his lips in annoyance, he breathed out a long sigh. "Be careful out there." Alan grumbled before he turned on his heel and marched over to the kitchen. Standing by the kitchen's open door, the stove was to his right, and the aisle was built around to face out towards the garden through the kitchen's window. The aprons rack was just to his right. Alan took the green one and made his way over to the stove. Removing his round spectacles, he placed them on an idle napkin on the aisle. Being as mild-mannered as he was, Alan was accustomed to housework. Though he was the middle child, he was the most competent when it turned to take care of his siblings, being able to cook and clean was very convenient. A brief flash from the corner of his vision caught his attention for a moment, and he turned to the backyard from the kitchen window. Was that lightning just now? Alan wondered as he tied a knot behind his back with the apron's harness. But that was unlikely. The weather had been clear and sunny just a moment earlier, and the forecast today said nothing about a lightning storm. Shaking his head as he dismissed the thought, Alan took a stirring spoon from near the stove and began to gently stir the pot. This chicken soup looked very nice, and a lot of its contents were vegetables like spinach surprisingly. He assumed they were there to absorb any excess fat. Humming a pleasant tune, he danced with his feet while he ever so slightly adjusted the flame under the pot. A minute passed and he was having a pleasant time now. But then another flash, and Alan was sure it came from the garden. What is that? This time he gave an accommodating pause and peered out through the kitchen window to see that a very dark and imposing cloud was approaching from the distance. Turning off the stove, he walked to the kitchen door to the backyard. Forgetting to remove his green apron, he walked out to the backyard and immediately noticed that the wind had picked up. Blowing upwards from under him, he suddenly had to hold down his apron from hitting his face when he stepped out. This also immediately grew his concern. Wildly turning to observe his surroundings, he heard the sound of tin sheets creaking and banging as they collided with each other while rocking up and down. There was no storm on the weather forecast, he said to himself, and scrutinized the approaching thundering cloud more intently. So, what could that dash? There was a bright light, and every bodily sensation after that faded except for his sight, which saw an approximation of white noise followed by bright pink, and was gone. The boy looked around. His surroundings had completely shifted. Suddenly he was not under a stormy suburban sky. He was still in the backyard, but the scene had changed, namely the weather. The storm was a year away as far as the clouds told that story. It was bright. And the clouds looked particularly beautiful. They were practically glowing. An effect of the unusual lighting, no doubt. Turning to his body, he was still wearing his clothes, thank God, and even the green apron from the kitchen remained firmly taut. Then the boy's eyes grew wide in his confusion, and Alan made to speak a word, though he was unable to find such words to fit his current bizarre situation. Alan, somebody called him, he answered quite slowly and turns around to meet with an odd sight. What was that? He unsurely asked when he looked back to see that the backyard door to their house was wide open, and into the room was a tall hall lined with plain white concrete. What is dash? What? He squinted and did make sure that he saw it clearly. Looking back at the sky, he thought to himself something was seriously wrong with it. Curious and confused, he began to march forward at a steady pace. Hello? Did someone call me? I heard a name, my name. Called further, but no reply came. Alan slowly paced to the backyard porch. As nothing called back to answer him, he was left in silence, only drowned out by the light breeze. Standing just shy of the doorway, he hesitated for a few moments as he looked back one last time to the sky and wondered, what happened just now? With a gulp and his desire for answers taking charge, he entered through the open doorway. There he found the hall empty and white, and this was its appearance. The hall appeared thoroughly clean and awfully well kept. The spotless tall walls were white, as did the polished concrete floors that were also white. 3 doorways lined the far wall. 2 of them were elevators, while the last one farthest was the stairway, accompanied by a sign written stairway. 3 columns extended to the ceiling lining the middle of the hall, and as you entered the door you would see a plaque in pure black, possibly made from slate or granite, which held some sort of list written in a yellow accent. Alan had no words as he stood in the doorway for a few seconds. Apprehensive at first, he stepped in finally and made his way over to the black plaque erected on the wall, which seemed to show a manifest of the building's directory. Though amusingly, even though entries were divided into personnel, accounting, creative, and destructive, the manifest all pointed to room number 7. What is this? Alan muttered to himself. This whole arrangement seemed a parody of corporate practice. And he was still too bewildered to laugh at a joke right now. You're looking for room 7? A deep voice cut through the hall suddenly, which made Alan jump in place. Briefly flailing his arms up, he leaned on the wall as he turned. Alan saw what appeared to be an African-American man in his 50s dressed in a janitor's attire of some sort topped off with a blue-colored baseball cap. Accompanying him was one bucket with what appeared to be a duster hosted inside. Busy mopping the floor, the boy swore the man had not been there when he entered the building. Standing quite still, Alan slowly turned to the directory to his right, revised it, and slowly looked back. Yeah, figured, the boy said as he cleared his throat. One more time, he looked to the windows that seemed to shine an omnipresent white light. Alan breathed out slow to assess his situation. Here he was in a truly strange place, coming from a door that led to his backyard that was supposed to lead into his house. Any amount of information, no matter how little it may be, was crucial to alleviate the distress that paced up his heartbeat, which in turn made his breath shallow. Also worth mentioning was the headache, like a piece of glass scraping in his head. So marching over to the only person he could see, he wanted to ask a question. Sir? The boy asked, hesitant at first. Grunting, he halted his work and straightened his back. What is it, son? The old man turned up and rested both his hands on the butt of the white plastic pole. Where is this place? It wasn't natural, Alan was sure of that. This hall exuded an aura of an otherworldly nature, as if he wasn't on Earth anymore but somewhere, well, brighter. The old man paused for a moment, then fastening his cap he gave a giggle. Oh, you see, well, I'm actually not quite sure myself, giving the boy a toothy smile. The air around them became increasingly awkward as the silence between them progressed. Looking quite bewildered, Alan turned around for a moment with his mouth hung open, then looked back to the old man. How do I get to room 7? I'll be on the 7th floor. Stairs right over there. Taking his mob, the janitor quickly went back to work. Oh, I think I'll take the elevator. The boy dryly dismissed. Out of order, the man matched Alan's dryness in his reply, and Alan immediately turned on his heel and began walking towards the stairwell. The pace of his march was quick, perhaps in a hurry to leave as soon as possible. Would you mind giving me a hand with this floor? I'm sorry? Alan asked as he shuffled around, continuing to walk to the stairway backwards. Without saying a word, the old man gestured to the floor around them. Having finished half the hall, the floor glistened with the wet layer on top. Alan looked around briefly trying to think of a response. Isn't it urgent? He asked as he pointed to the stairs. Well, that depends. You're only meeting with the boss man, but I'm sure he can wait. I really need to sit down, he said with a strain as he flexed around his hips. The boy reeled at first because a meeting with this boss sounded quite urgent. But then he wondered, why would the janitor know about the company's appointments? Maybe this place was as laid back as the old man presented. Okay then, why not? It would not be the first time he helped an old man for no particular reason. Wonderful, just come on over here and we'll get started right away, giddily said the old man with 2 claps, setting his mop into the bucket to let it soak. Alan turned to the stairway one more time before marching over. And as he went on over, a question loomed. Old man, can I ask you why you're here? The boy asked as he approached, though the old man looked like he didn't seem to hear. Stricken odd, but not faltering, Alan persisted. This place is very clean, you must do a lot of work around the building. Again, the man simply bent down and inspected his metal buckets. I can't help but notice you can't hear me. And old man, don't you only have one mop dash? I can hear you, the janitor suddenly said as he turned around. In his hands he had a second set of mops and buckets. Incidentally, he had unintentionally struck Alan with the mopping end of the pole, and some clumps of cloth had gotten into the boy's mouth. Pew dash. Pew dash. Cleaning his mouth and tongue, he instinctively spat to the floor and wiped with his sleeve. Hey, he began as he turned a bit pent up to the old man. A little warning might have been nice. Oh, sorry. I thought you'd see it coming, he commented with a giggle. Where did you even get one more dash? Now, you start from there, that doorway, and I'll work my way towards you. As he said that, he immediately set to work, whistling the tune of Amazing Grace quite soulfully and embellishing on some parts. The old man's steady work pace was noted by Alan as being very impressive for someone who just complained about a sore back. Alan for his part looked to the other half of the hallway still uncleaned. So, he turned to the old man, I just start now? No response came from him again. Was he really ignoring him, or was his hearing a bit impaired also? But with a nod, Alan set to his work and tried to finish as soon as possible. He would have to pace himself accordingly, and even when his mind was in another place, here he was helping an old man mop the floor. Despite his present circumstance, he found his work to be quite calming. A moment to rest his mind as his thoughts went once again to the outside. Catching a glimpse out from the doorway, he saw the backyard still out there along with the clear blue, almost whited sky. Squinting for a moment, he took a deep breath and sighed, then followed with a brief chuckle. What the hell happened with me? Now you see, said the old man from across the hall. You need to move your buckets quickly, or else a stain collects around it. Yes, I know, the boy responded. Sure is, Pippin. I do enjoy myself some manual labor. There's freedom to it. He gave a toothy chuckle again. Some of the happiest people on earth smile to high heaven at the end of the day. Alan found it hard to disagree as he paused his strokes for a moment. The best days of his life were the ones when he collapsed onto his bed after a long day of work. So the boy gave a brief chuckle in agreement. And there he, bending back slightly, the old janitor groaned pleasantly from his stretch. The pain in his back alleviated so fantastically. Phew, the boy expressed as well as he straightened up beside the old man and looked back as well. The entire hall glistened with the fruits of their labor, and with this, the boy smiled. Alan was in a good mood. So, where should I put this? Lifting his mop up to the janitor as he turned on his heel to face him. Just leave it there in your mop. I'll put it away. So off you go then, son. The old man never turned to face him as he spoke, though a distant smile was ever present on his face as he seemed to admire the glittering floors of the smooth concrete hall. Alan remained silent, looking around in contemplation for a moment before he shrugged and left the mop as he was told to do. All right, he said as he turned to the janitor one last time. Goodbye then, old man. He acknowledged, though it was impossible to discern what he meant. Walking away, Alan barely blew out a respiring breath before an echoing bang erupted, its sound bouncing off the walls. Instinctively raising his arms over his head along with one leg, he looked back to see that his mop had fallen over along with the bucket. And as such the dirty water began spilling back onto the pristine white floor they had just cleaned. Oh no! Hissing for a bit, he walked closer. Go on ahead, I'll clean this up, quickly reassured the old man, and Alan was quick to clear his throat and march onwards to the elevators. Remember, the elevator's out of order. Right? He silently cussed and turned left to the stairway. Alan couldn't see it now, but the old man gave him a toothy chuckle as the boy walked away. Hello. Alan had taken a flight of stairs up to the 7th floor, whereupon he encountered a door. Pushing in, he gazed into an expansive hall like the one below. Again, this entire floor was white marble, white concrete walls, and white concrete pillars dotted here and there. Initially, he was about to go back out before a noise caught his attention, a soft rumble that had come from a square hole in the ceiling. Marching over, he found a tall white folding ladder positioned under the square hole. A large blue duffel bag sat beside it. Peering into the hole, Alan could see nothing but darkness greet him back, akin to a bottomless pit that led upwards instead of down. He was unnerved, but the noise unmistakably came from here, so he had to try. Hello. He repeated, striking the ladder like a drum. I'm looking for whoever's in charge of this establishment. To his surprise, a voice called back. Be right with ya. I'm trying to fix the light. Tell me if it's working. A strangely familiar voice instructed from the abyss in the ceiling. Before he could dwell on his thoughts, Alan's vision was assaulted by a disorientingly bright glow, which made him reel back in surprise. He cried, immediately stepping back to rub his eyes. Kind of bright though? Yeah, it is for most people. Spend their entire lives in the dark? Alan heard that voice again. It grew closer and closer as he heard the owner descending the ladder. Blinking his black streaks away, Alan looked to see that his suspicions held true. That voice should have been familiar. Trying to hide from me? He finished as he straightened his blue electrician onesie. First, at a loss for words, he quickly thought of a response. Alan cleared his throat, The elevator's broken? He asked rhetorically and slightly unamused. It was the old man from downstairs, and his outfit had now changed to that of an electrician. To Alan's inquiry, he only seemed a bit embarrassed when he gave him a warm chuckle. Yeah, but I'll get around to it, the old man simply stated with a sly wink, seemingly mistaking the boy's intention. He bent down and began packing his things into the blue duffel bag beside the ladder. You wanted to ask me something? Alan was tasked out of his stupor, and the boy cleared his throat again. Oh yes. Is this the 7th floor? It is, the old man confirmed. Standing up, he grabbed the ladder and folded it, and laid it on its side. Then where is this, boss? The boy smiled bright in hope, but it quickly disappeared as he scanned his surroundings. He's in management. The man zipped up his bag and picked up the ladder. And where is management? It is on the 7th floor. And without warning, the electrician began to walk away. The boy was too stunned to speak. Just before Alan requested elaboration, the old man made an L-turn right and walked towards a prominent concrete pillar, noticeably a bit bigger than the others on the floor. Alan tilted his head. What started out as odd when the ladder didn't follow through as the man walked behind the pillar, came to be absolutely perplexing when the electrician appeared in a different set of clothes as he came back to view. Walking out and around the column, the man reappeared dressed in a fine-tailored white suit, contrasted with pristine black in his shoes, his tie, and the handkerchief over his heart. You must be Alan, I have been expecting you. Those words brought out a mixed bag of emotions from Alan. They held power, and he was immediately aware that this man was the boss. But despite this, Alan couldn't help but laugh. Oh, that's just hilarious. So you're the boss, the electrician, and the janitor? The boy chuckled and the man in the white suit nodded. What a strange arrangement. Alan did his best to hush his giggles, though the boss seemed to be chuckling as well. The boy's laughter died down in time, but a smile persisted as the man took in a soft breath. You always were spirited, just like your mother, he began, and Alan's face shifted immediately, but the boy remained silent. She didn't mind rolling up her sleeves either, son. She never gave pause to any odd request. The man stood now, towering a head over the boy who had stood so tall before. The boy eyed suspiciously at this old man, who the boy's view of had changed only in the few words he had just spoken. All right, what is this? His tone became quite serious as his voice lowered. How do you know my mother, and how on earth did I end up here? Instead of backing away, the old man pulled onto Alan to walk with him, and the boy was very hesitant to follow along. Oh, I know quite a lot about you, Alan. He looked forward and squinted. Just about everything there is to know. He further pulled Alan closer, holding onto the boy's shoulders as he bent down a little. He explained, everything you've ever said or done or thought about doing is right here on this smart tablet. Suddenly, the old man pulled out a white-colored tablet with black trims and showed it to Alan. Letting go of the boy's shoulders, he made his way over to a pure white office desk and chair which they had been steadily approaching. The boy remained silent, growing more and more confused with every passing moment. And as to how you ended up here, please don't patronize and don't make me say it. The old man egged with a toothy giggle, setting down the tablet and taking a seat. Alan tilted his head. I'm sorry. The boy's eyes briefly flicked to the windows on the far wall. Oh, you are choosing to follow through? The man giggled, seemingly impressed with the boy's fortitude. What no? No, what are you going on about? Alan shifted in his place, eyes beginning to scan manic at his surroundings. The man's grin twitched once, twice, then his face fell and was replaced with bewilderment. Wait a minute, you're being serious? Ever since I got here, I have been nothing but confused and quite frankly scared. I don't know how I arrived, I just walked in from my backyard. I'm not patronizing you, I'm being absolutely serious. The boy's voice trembled at the end, and he began to take a pitiful stance of defiance and panic. Oh, the man replied, and stayed silent without emotion showing on his face. Oh well, you certainly have to see. The man rubbed the back of his head, then pressed something on his tablet. Alan's attention was drawn to a projector lowering down from the ceiling, suspended on a rod halted just shy of maybe 8 feet off the ground, pointing a section of the nearest wall unoccupied by windows or doors. The projector flickered to life and displayed an image of a smoking corpse that wore a green apron over a white t-shirt and pink-colored track pants. This is in no way how you were supposed to be notified, but the corpse in that picture? He gestured with his palm. It's you. Alan turned back to the image projected on the wall and stayed silent. His eyes squinted and he looked back to the man sitting behind his desk before turning back to the projection with his head tilted. That's me. Yes. But I appear so deceased. The boy exclaimed and began to pat himself down, confirming to himself that he was still alive to himself. You must be mistaken. Oh, but I am not. What was the last thing you remember before you came here? Why would that dash? Alan's words died in his mouth as he hung himself in thought for a moment. Wait, lightning? Yes, I remember lightning. You should. The man nodded, then turned to the tablet in his hand. As it says here, you were unfortunately killed by a lightning bolt. Alan visibly flinched, finally accepting the fact that he had died. As was expected, he seemed quite upset. But why dash? I'm still so young, dash. So young? Anyway, I brought you here to deliver you an offer. The man abruptly moved on, and Alan was almost left behind in the conversation. The boy did his best to try and keep up, as the man left his seat and began to make his way toward the sputtering boy. Oh, offer? Whose offer? Mine. The man stated flat and sure. Alan, on the subtext that you have literally perished prematurely, you have shown to me through the janitor's test a certain strength of character, so I offer you reincarnation. The boy was once again too stunned to speak. First, he learned that he had died, and then he was now being offered a so-called reincarnations by a man who Alan was pretty sure had been some sort of angel. Reincarnation? Alan finally said, looking down to the ground. Then a small smile began to form on his lips but was quickly sullied by the words the man spoke next. I would rather not send you back and tease you, with the prospect of a life you can never resume. I'm not a cruel god, and I don't like how your books portray me. The white-suited man sighed and turned on his heel, walking back to his desk. The boy's expression became stone-like for a few moments before he shook his head to scrutinize a certain point in the man's most recent statement. Wait, when you say God, you mean God? The boy couldn't help but twiddle his fingers. With a small letter U, son. A god can be either all-powerful, yet in that he can't be all-good. And if a god is all-good, he cannot be all-powerful. The old man shook his head and sunk low in his seat. But, you're still? Oh yes, I still hold certain benefits, I still created the universe. I'm as much a nurturer as I am a creator. The man began to chuckle. I should be more akin to a mother, but you grew up with your father mostly, so it's no surprise you perceive me as a man. You are not. The boy further questioned his specific gender. I'm whatever you want me to be. The god stated with his arms held out, offering a bright smile, prompting Alan to give a chuckle in amusement. Then the boy looked down and stood silent, occasionally coupled with long sighs. Even though the god's efforts to ease his nerves were successful, there was no easy way to recover from the information the boy had been subjected to. Your mother? The god began, and the boy perked up. She was a good woman, an amazing role model. Could tell me more about her? The god smiled warm and nodded. You were young, I expected you didn't remember much. You see, you could almost call her a hero. Hero? The boy's tone was of slight disbelief. That was a strong word he would use to describe someone. Yes, as I recalled before, when an opportunity presented itself, she never turned it down. She was an optimist, and it was so very contagious. Alan looked down again and smiled to himself. In life, she was happy. The god cleared his throat and unconsciously stressed his next words. And to those who had often brought their smile to others, many smiles will be brought. The boy looked up and began scrutinizing the god, who now bore quite a small but somber and distant smile. Then the boy understood. Affixing his stance, he straightened his shirt and cleared his throat. All right then, Mr. God, what exactly do you have in mind? The old man was apparently very taken by the boy's brash, looking at him with his eyes wild and bemused. He failed to immediately form his words, but then took his tablet in hand and stood tall. Very well then, Alan Jesse Adams. I shall offer you 3 wishes. By the way, Why do you use a tablet? Alan and the god sat on the pristine white marble-tiled floor surrounded by discarded sheets of paper that had a number of drawings and writings. I am not a savage, my son. Technology is a convenient tool. You should know that better than an old man. The god patted the boy on his shoulder, but received not even a grunt from Alan as the boy seemed to be in deep contemplation. Huh. Then for my first wish, what if I had the power of control over technology? Oh, that would be most versatile, and this world you are going to is quite backwards in that department given the context of their time. And there is nothing more you'll tell me about it? The boy's tone became a little supplicate, but the god refused. A dash? No. He shook his head and showed Alan the screen of his tablet. Doing so would dash. Then what's stopping me from just wishing I had, say, the powers of Dr. Manhattan? The boy interrupted, and the god looked up and began scratching his head. I could ensure that I am safe that way. Alan added. Well, nothing's stopping. The god shrugged, then wagged his finger. But just know that what appears as absolute power is never absolute, not even mine. The boy grumbled. At least I should still wish to be intelligent. Being the dumb one, I have lived that, and I never want to live it again, the boy declared, sketching up a rough image of a cartoonish brain with fuzzy lines radiating off of it. Beside the sketch was a comical interpretation of himself, naked, reaching out to touch a heap of raw iron and copper wires. The mass seemed to be reaching back, reminiscent of a certain painting by Michelangelo. Be careful though, once you learn about engineering principles and the laws of the universe in depth you might begin to fall into a habit of uninspired ideas. I think I'm reasonably creative, but I'll be safe, who knows? The boy began to draft another cartoonish brain, but this time it seemed to be made of bubbles that were light bulbs. As soon as he was done, the god took a picture of Alan's 3 sketches. Very good there. The man mumbled as he fiddled with his tablet. That will do. He finished with a hearty laugh. Alan got to his feet and offered his hand to seal their deal, but before their hands made contact. One more thing. The boy called out as his eyes stayed away. If I again, what happens to me? The god reeled his head briefly before he answered. Suddenly taking the boy's hand, they shook once and Alan's clothes began to lift upwards, followed by his body. A gust entered the empty office, powerful enough to smash the glass windows and blew Alan's sketches wildly around the rooms in a flutter. I suppose you'll just have to find out, won't you? He gave him his toothy smile and a salute. The god had to yell from the noise of the wind. Alan's face was that of exasperation, but soon sighed and returned the god's gesture as he floated in the air parallel to the floor. Then his vision was overtaken by a blinding light and white noise came once more, making him feel like he was suffocating under a crushing weight. Like he was about to die. And was gone. The rumbling of thunder drowned the sound of heavy rain for a few moments, muffled by the walls to the people inside the hospital. It stood atop a hill, surrounded by a lush evergreen forest, a rare sight for an establishment in a city. The wailing screams of a mother could be heard. Shoo, it's almost over. A nurse standing by her side monitored the screens which showed her BPM at 158, Yash? She began chanting, ignoring the pain of her hand that the howling woman gripped so tightly. I can see his head. The obstetrician informed his assistants and whoever was free began to scramble, gathering everything necessary from around the room, just a little more. Even as pain tormented her every being, Angelina pushed through for him. She could feel the doctor lightly tug at little Ray from under the blanket. He's almost here, got him. The doctor in one movement stood up and turned around, and laid the baby boy into a towel handy by. Angelina was left with a feeling of triumph in her euphoria, heaving up and down her sweat trickled over her brow. Looking down from her position, she could see the other nurses and the doctor huddled together over the taller male nurse who carried little Ray in a towel. What's worse, she heard no cry from her baby. Mr. Omura, you may enter now, a nurse informed a man who had been sitting just outside the operation room. He had heard everything that had happened inside, and he felt like throwing up. He had a weak stomach after all, and hearing his wife's anguish made him double over. Standing up, he fixed himself to look his best before he made it inside. Bringing with him a warm smile, he was prepared to welcome a new member into the Omura household. But what greeted him was a less than stellar sight. To his left, the doctor and nurses huddled over his newborn son, seeming to be discussing something amongst themselves. To his right, he saw his wife who still laid on the soft bed covered by a thin white blanket. "Toshi!" She squirmed out, bringing her hands over her mouth. Hitoshi Omura looked back to the doctors. The umbilical cord had been cut and the obstetrician called for his attention. He brought with him in his arms the newborn baby wrapped in a towel. It was here when the man finally noticed that his son was not crying. "Do not be alarmed," he said to the father's shell-shocked and wide expression. "Your boy is not dead, but I must say he is quite strange," the doctor informed with a slight wince. "Quite strange?" Taking the baby in his arms, he looked down to see that indeed, his son was alive and well. But instead of crying like newborn babies were expected to do, his baby son took to turn his big, bubbly eyes to look at his father most curiously. "What the heck?" Mr. Omura quickly muttered out in his bewilderment. "Toshi?" Angelina called for him, and he was immediately by her side. The boy's mother took him in her arms and was herself quite taken aback by his strange disposition. "My Ray." But she quickly got over it and gave her son a warm embrace. "My little Ray." Just then, a single bolt of lightning struck the hospital, leaving the room's occupants in darkness at least until the staff got the generators up and running. To this, the midwife wrung her hands and declared the lightning a bad omen. "This boy will be a child of darkness," she said to nurse beside her just loud enough for Angelina to hear and frown, and reply. "No. He will be a child of light." As he laid on the hospital bed beside his mother, Alan had realized that he had never experienced anything this calming and soothing. That God had stated this world was dangerous, but right now, he had never felt safer. The door that led to their room opened and two pairs of footsteps were heard. One was heavy and steady while the other was lighter and rapid, almost like a patter across the light-colored tiled floor. Angelina raised her head and turned to look towards the doorway. And when she saw who had come to visit her this morning, her mood brightened even more than it already had. There approached her younger brother, Lucas. He was a man in his early 20s, bearing sharp and prominent features on his face with vibrant blonde hair and blue eyes, just like her. Dressed in a black leather jacket and khaki jeans, he stood proudly stray from the sparsely decorated white walls of the hospital. Her oldest and only other child, Tekashi, running ahead of his uncle, reached the edge of her bed rightly quicker than his uncle, who still went at his one pace. Tekashi was 6 years of age, and like his father he had dark reddish-brown hair, but unlike his father's eyes which were botheringly pale, Tekashi had a pair of charcoal black irises. He was a tall boy for his age, but that was not surprising considering how tall she and Hitoshi were. The boy ran up to the bed with a wide smile on his face. As he looked at the baby lying next to her, he opened his mouth almost in awe. "That's my baby brother?" he asked with a short breath, pointing at the baby with starry eyes. Angel simply smiled and nodded, while carefully lifting the baby in her arms so that Tekashi could get a clearer look. While the little guy snored, he thankfully didn't seem to wake up. Tekashi moved closer and stared at him intently. He's so small," he said with fascination, bouncing lightly in place from the tip of his feet as he was still not tall enough to comfortably see above over the bed despite his height. She chuckled at his observation before a cough shifted her attention to her brother who had finally arrived. "Funny. I seem to recall you saying that you weren't gonna go through all that again," he said while holding in a snort, index finger held up across his nose. "Oh, hush you." He quickly gave him an unimpressed face before he started to make any more quips. Her brother Lucas would always try to annoy her at every chance he got. Lucas laughed and turned to kneel beside Tekashi, who was still closely inspecting their little Ray, twisting and tilting his head at odd angles to the sides in deep contemplation. "You sure seem enthusiastic." He looked to the little boy and stared at him amusingly with a brow raised. Tekashi reached out and grabbed the little baby's hand and squeezed, taking notice of how it almost felt like it could break from one wrong move. "He seems so helpless." His uncle chuckled. "Yeah, they usually are," he said with his mouth curving downwards sharply, looking dry of emotion. "Well, you're going to have to be a big brother for him because of it. You know that?" He started while giving his older sister a brief glance from the corner of his eye. Do you think you could do that? I'm asking for the both of us here. He used his thumb and gestured between himself and his sister. Tekashi suddenly adorned a determined look and scrunched up his nose. Yeah. Tekashi's going to be the ultimate older brother for Rei. He proudly declared with his right fist raised high into the air. Angel and Lucas looked on to the little kid with their faces mirroring the pride they both held inside. The blonde man cleared his throat and got up on his feet. All right, little man, come on, time's up, Lucas said with a grunt as he got up. A very unsavory and somber note played inside Tekashi's head. Already? But we just got here. He turned to his mother, walking up to her and resting his head on her arms. Mom, can we stay? He gave his mother the best look to guilt-trip her into letting them stay. Unfortunately for him, Angel had already developed a small immunity due to the number of times he would try to use it for his advantage. Go on with your uncle, Tekashi, she said while bringing her hand to ruffle Tekashi's hair a bit. Besides, your little brother needs his sleep. I told you it was just a small visit. Remember your promise to me? His uncle tried to remind him and reached under his nephew's belly. Tekashi huffed and tried to stomp his feet before he was whisked away by Uncle Lucas, much to his displeasure. He took to whining even more, only stopping when his uncle offered to buy him some ice cream on the way home. Angelina watched them leave with a smile never leaving her face. 7 days? Angel said, looking on to where they had left. It's just 7 more days to go. Alan, meanwhile, was still pretending to sleep. The next 7 days may be boring, but he could endure it. After all, he had no responsibilities, and he was gonna enjoy it while he can. That name, Little Ray they would call him, he supposed he would have to get used to having a new name. A new world, a new life. This is so crazy, he said disbelievingly to himself in thought. Hitoshi came to pick them up one day, the 7 days flying by before Ray even had a chance to count. Most of his days and hours were spent sleeping, partially due to feeling oddly tired all the time, and from how shooting an embrace from his mother felt for him. He almost always felt warm and fuzzy throughout most of the days inside the hospital. As his mother and father sat at the front seats of the family car, little Ray was carried in his mother's arms as the vehicle cruised across the asphalt road that ran the seasides in 2 lanes. The sun was just dipping above the horizon of ocean water, and the scenery was simply breathtaking. Hitoshi looked at the sky clustered with orange clouds and breathed in the salty sea air. A content and steady smile on his face. This was beautiful. The beach just below them could do with a little cleaning, however. Some rather large piles of trash were beginning to collect from being washed ashore by the waves. He turned away from the beach and shifted to look towards the passenger seat, where he was greeted with an arguably more beautiful scene. His angel cradling their son, sweetly singing a song to him. The same song he heard when he first heard her sing. 25 years and my life is still. He snickered to himself and faced forwards to steer the car right on a turn of the road. Ever since he had known her, Angelina always held an interesting taste in music. He never thought his life would ever turn out this perfect. Little tears threatened to spill from his eyes, but he wouldn't allow it. He would like to remember this moment as clear as he can. Ray, their baby boy, meanwhile, was also enjoying the beautiful scenery just outside. It had been about 3 days since his eyes returned to their full capabilities, and he had been enjoying it thoroughly. As they drove on the 2-lane road by the beach with a viewing platform built stretching out onto the waters, the place seemed oddly familiar to the boy, like a place that held sentiment and purpose. But Ray ultimately dismissed the thought he would definitely remember a place this scenic. His parents, they were quite the interesting pair. His mother turned out to be of German descent, hence the Western features, while his father was Japanese. Funnily enough, his mother was fairly taller than his father, taller by at least 3 inches. He had no idea how they met each other. But one thing was for sure, they seemed perfect for one another. They would quip and laugh together, talking with themselves almost throughout their entire ride. Some would suspect they were a newly married couple, and he, their first child. He had almost thought the same, though the visit of who he assumed to be his older brother and uncle the other day dismissed that hypothesis. The view of the ocean got briefly hidden as they passed a small hill. Hitoshi said something to Angel and caused her to look up through the windshield, whereby a smile beamed across her face. That something seemed to be their home, coming into view as they drove up the driveway. The house sat on a lofty position atop a hill, the ocean just below it. It adorned yellow paints on the walls of the first floor, white on the second. Mediterranean blue terracotta tiles were used for the roofing, providing for a nice contrast that would sit beautifully with the sky. It was of reasonable size too, easily being able to accommodate at least 6 people living in it. As they drove up, the sounds of the tire crunching the gravel reached Ray's ears. It was a calming and pleasant sound. If he was going to be living here, he had no qualms about doing so. The house had some lights on the inside for some reason. Maybe his parents had left a housekeeper. His intense observation caught the eye of his mother, who called his name to garner his attention and said something to him in Japanese with a smile. His father also joined in from his side of the car, puffing out his chest and bearing a look of pride. They must have been quite fond of their home. Ray couldn't really blame them. It was a beautiful house. And even if he had to learn a new language from scratch, he had a feeling it would be worth it. And speaking of learning Japanese, he was somehow making progress despite his age. Still couldn't read anything though, but he can understand some phrases. Must have been the increased intelligence. As they made their way to their front door, Hitoshi was carrying most of the bags of stuff they had bought. Angel was holding little Ray close to her chest. As he hung on her, he was still ogling at her house. "Why would you look at that?" her husband called out to her. She raised her head and her mood dimmed immediately. On their driveway was a matte green Harley-Davidson Vrod Custom, and the jolly laughter of her brother rung out from their house not soon after she took in the sight. "Oh, for crying out loud!" She grumbled in English as she brought her left hand up to massage her temple, but she felt a sudden shift in her arm. She looked down and was greeted with the sight of her son giving her the stink eye, almost as if he understood what she just said. The memory of what the doctor had said to Hitoshi resurfaced to her mind. Despite what she may want to think, she couldn't help but agree with the doctor that her baby was indeed an odd one. Her thoughts were halted by her husband, who continued walking while laughing, shaking his head from side to side. She huffed through her nose and began walking again. When they entered their house, sure enough, her brother was currently seated across their son Tekashi on the living room coffee table set on the green carpets with gold accents. They looked like they were playing a game with a deck of cards. When they heard them enter, the both of them turned to look at what made the noise from the front door. When they saw who they were, Tekashi immediately went to tackle one of them in a big hug. "You're home!" He cheered while clinging onto his father like an overly clingy koala. "Careful! Careful!" Hitoshi cried in alarm, almost falling over as he couldn't move his legs. Tekashi yelped and released his grip on Hitoshi's legs immediately. "I could have fallen over there," his father reprimanded him, awkwardly stepping in place to regain balance. "Hee." Tekashi laughed sheepishly, looking down before lifting his head. "I'm sorry?" His father suddenly picked him up in his arms. "Oh, don't be. I missed you too." He began laughing while spinning around in place, a laugh also shared in full by Tekashi, who gripped on tight. As Hitoshi stopped, his hug tightened and his head leaned into Tekashi's messy hair. The boy must have seen something behind him enter through the doorway as he suddenly gasped. "Mom!" he yelled, flailing his limbs about as if wanting to be released. His mother just smiled. "Did you miss me?" She spoke in a calm voice, still carrying little Ray in her arms. After being set down on the floor, Tekashi bolted to his mother. Embracing her in the same manner, he embraced his father. "Yes, I did. I missed you so much. Dad's cooking tastes so bland," he said with a shiver, still latching onto one of her legs. His mother looked confused for a moment before she glared at Hitoshi. "Didn't you hire a housekeeper?" she asked her husband as she ruffled Tekashi's hair with her free left hand. Hitoshi shifted in place under her gaze. I thought Tekashi should at least eat the food his dad makes from time to time," he said with a nervous and shaky smile. His wife just breathed out a heavy sigh of exasperation. "Of course you did," she said in a voice that sounded all too unamused. Hitoshi, trying to redirect the situation, called out to the other man present in the room. "Lucas, he didn't know you were still in town." He asked his brother-in-law, who up until that point had remained silent. Yeah, the job got delayed. It was something about a villain attack. Oh, that's too bad. Hitoshi stumbled slight, unsure of how to articulately respond. Not to worry though, I heard they were finally sending in some pros to deal with it. As the two men walked into the kitchen to continue their chat. Angel cat down on the couch, little Ray still in her arms. Tekashi was lightly poking him in the face and on his cheeks, face marred with the expression of purest fascination. He's so soft, he said with wide eyes, poking Ray's plump cheeks with a finger. Did Uncle Lucas tell you his name yet? No, Tekashi said while shaking his head from side to side, his shoulders loosely bobbing along with the movements. His name is Omura Ray. You may call him your younger brother, Ray. Wow, he uttered with a voice still laden with fascination. His name sounds so cool. He bounced up and down on the springy cushions. Hi Ray. My name is Tekashi, your older brother, he proudly declared, making gestures with his hand. Little Ray just looked at him with a concerned face. You don't have to be scared about anything. I already promised Mom and Uncle Lucas that I would protect you from anything bad, he said with pride. Ray just stared at him for a moment before turning to his mother, who just looked at him with a smile. She seems to do that often, it seems. Until the sun went down the horizon, and the lights in their house flickered to life, Tekashi would try to make conversation with his little brother as their mother went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Do you like cartoons? Tekashi asked innocently. Little Ray just stared at him with a blank look. You don't? Well, that's too bad. It's really fun to watch them. His shoulders slumped and he turned towards the living room floor. Ray just continued to stare at him. Hey, I have an idea. After dinner, I could ask Mom and Dad to let us stay up late. And if they allow it, I'll show you one of my favorite shows. Maybe you'll like that one. Tekashi offered with a passionate declaration. He just received another blank stare again. It's okay, you don't have to say anything to them, you just let me do all the talking. He reassured him while he held his little brother's shoulders. This time, he got a very confused nod and smile from his brother. Sweet. Tekashi rejoiced, mistaking his brother's confused nod for approval. A young woman with dark blue hair and a pair of glasses came out of the kitchen. She was Saki Yashikich, their housekeeper. Tekashi, dinner's ready, she called out before returning to the kitchen, closing the door on her way back in. We're coming, he informed back with a yell, then turned to his brother with a wide smile. Come on, you're gonna love this. Mom's cooking is so good, he declared before haphazardly picking up his little brother and running into the kitchen, best of the best. When they arrived, the table was already set. The porridge and steamy bowls basked the dining area in a warm and homey residue. Their uncle noticed them coming in first, his standing by the fridge doing nothing really to help. Of course, he would reason he would just get in the way of things. Oh, look at you. You're a big boy now, aren't ya? He referred to Tekashi carrying little Ray in his arms. Of course I am. He looked offended. I have to be if I want to be a big brother. Ha, nice way of thinking, little man. Lucas congratulated him as he clapped his hands with a nod. Would everyone settle down at the table? The voice of the mother cut through from behind the aisle. And Tekashi, please set little Ray down over on that stool, she said, pointing at a tall but small chair with a tiny table running around it. Right? The boy declared, setting to the task immediately with a march. Well, here, let me help you. Their uncle walked up to them and reached out to grab Ray. No. The boy practically barked, before he bit the air in which Lucas' hand was. I have to prove that I can be a big brother to Ray, he insisted through his childish tantrum. Oh wow, you're really talking to this big brother thing, huh? His uncle just stared at him with a flat look for a moment, his hand awkwardly held out. Okay, let's see you do it then, big man. With a determined look, he marched to the wired tall chair and attempted to put his brother in it. Immediately realizing he couldn't reach the top to put him in. You still don't need my help? Came the mocking voice of his uncle, who couldn't help but chuckle at his attempts. No, that's fine. Tekashi struggled to lift the baby over his head to reach the stool. Come on, Lucas? Came his sister's tired voice that was not so amused. But he said he doesn't need any help with this. Lucas replied in a playful voice, hands raised to his sides in mocking defense. Give him a hand. He briefly caught the side of his sister's eye snake, a yellow spark of electricity, so he decided to concede. Lucas said finally with a small and light-hearted laugh to himself. He walked up to the two boys. One was in much more distress than the other. He picked up the smaller one and placed him in his chair. Here we go, he drawled out as he followed through on the action. Hey, I had that, Tekashi said with a huff. Sure you did? I did. I really had that. He continued to whine, waving his fists about in the air. His father Hitoshi could only watch with amusement as he began to feed little Ray, who didn't look like he was enjoying it that much. He would try to keep his mouth shut and turn his head away. All right, settle down, Angel said while making the final preparations for the meal. After everyone got seated, they paid their respects and began to eat. Small screeches of delight could be heard coming from Tekashi. He seemed to be enjoying his mother's phenomenal cooking. Angel had replaced her husband in feeding little Ray with the spoon. Come on, Ray. You have to try this. Tekashi reached towards his little brother, a spoonful of the chicken soup in hand, only to be stopped by his mother. Why can't he have some? He can't yet, it'll give him an ache in the belly if it's not this one. His mother explained while she held up a bowl that contained a milky substance to Tekashi's face before she brought it back to feed little Ray again. When in the hospital, and not even for lack of trying, her son simply refused to be fed from her breasts. Often, he turned his head to the opposite direction when she brought him closer, mouth held shut firmly. So, she reported this to the doctors and they prescribed him to be fed nutritional supplements that were exactly identical to mother's milk through bottles, and a certain cereal that turned to liquid when contact with stomach acid, able to be digested for even a baby as young as Ray. It was basically the same as being fed through the bottle and milk, but Hitoshi was always up to try new breakthroughs in science. But little Ray had enough, finally. And he flipped the bowl which fell unceremoniously to the table, spewing the chalky cereal all over the dinner table surface and begun reaching for the chicken soup with his tiny hands. He wants it. His brother cheered and reached for Ray with his spoon again. His mother just sighed. I told you he can't dash. Come on, dear, if he wants it let him have a little bit, Hitoshi pleaded. I'd wager his food's already going to neutralize for indigestion. That's rich coming from you, Angel said with a glare, to which he could just flash her a nervous smile. But in the brief time they took their eyes off of them, Tekashi had already fed little Ray the soup. And going by his tiny squeaks, he was also enjoying it very much. See, he loves it, would you be cruel enough to take that away from him? Besides, if he does get uneasy, I'll take full responsibility and buy more of the MNB packets, Hitoshi said with a palm held up to his side. Angel just slumped in defeat. Her cooking was truly amazing, and little Ray looked like he was really enjoying it. It would be too cruel to take that away from him now. Fine, she grumbled while cleaning up the little mess he made, stealing concerned glances at the brothers. But don't feed him more than a couple of teaspoons, okay? Ma'am, I'm going home for the night, came the voice of their housekeeper from the kitchen door. Of course. Did Hitoshi give you your pay for today? She asked while continuing to clean the mess on the table. Yes, he did, she answered, and then looked at her brother, Lucas, from the corner of her eye while she cleared her throat. Good night, ma'am. She shook her head, waving while walking away to the front door. Good night. She returned. What was that about? She said in thought. After watching her leave, she turned back to the table. Tekashi still feeding little Ray spoonfuls of soup without any of the chunky stuff inside, and her husband making small chats with her brother about current events, mostly hero-related stuff. Her tense expression slowly morphed into one of content. She was finally home, with her husband and kids under one roof again. Life was going perfectly and she would be happy for it. Ray gave his compliments to whoever made dinner tonight. They sure knew what they were doing. Although he was pretty sure he should not be eating things like the soup while this young in years, he just couldn't eat the milky cereal his parents would try to feed him. Could he even eat those too? He was not sure. That was why when his brother offered him a sip of his soup, his body moved on its own and attempted to consume it right away. And he did not regret it at all. Sure, his belly might disagree later, but he was certain it was worth it. Mommy, can we stay up late? Tekashi asked his mother, still feeding little Ray his soup. Why? His mother frowned with a confused look. Well, I wanted to show Ray all my favorite shows, he explained. Angel considered it for a moment. After a while, she decided it would serve as a good bonding moment for the brothers. Sure, but only until 9. If I come in and you're still awake after that, there will be consequences, she stated. Tekashi smiled in delight. Got it? Thanks, Mum. He rejoiced. After finishing their meal, they started cleaning the table, Tekashi helping in every way he can. After they were done, he immediately took his brother upstairs to his room. Hitoshi and Angel looked on with amusement. They're getting along quite well, Hitoshi commented as he did the dishes. But I suppose that's to be expected. Angel simply smiled and nodded. Anyway, thanks for dinner. Saved me quite a sum, came the voice of her brother. I'll be going now. I'll see you off on the driveway, just gotta finish this first, Hitoshi called from the sink. Then something clicked for Angel. As Lucas made his way out, he was halted by a grab to his right shoulder, courtesy of his sister. And she currently had a foreboding aura surrounding her. Lucas, you didn't try anything with Saki, did you? She asked in a dark voice. Lucas gulped briefly but tried to keep his composure. No. Why would I do that? Then what was that at dinner? She referred to Saki's odd behavior when she looked at him. What was what at dinner? Lucas's voice began to tremble. Saki looked at you from the corner of her eye with a blush. So I'll ask again, you didn't try anything with her, did you? Her voice was even darker now. After a sigh, Lucas straightened his back. I can neither confirm nor deny this accusation you've contrived against my name. He raised his hand to his side, palm facing her way. Her eye twitched. Why you dash, just as she said that a puff of smoke slammed into her face coming from Lucas's palm. And in the brief distraction he caused, Lucas made towards the front door as fast as he could. Gah! Angel was caught by surprise by the smoke. And when it cleared and she could see again, Lucas had already mounted his motorcycle and was riding away. The engines on the Harley reverberated across the narrow seaside roads as they saw the light from the bike slowly retreat into the distance. You scared him away again. And I wanted to say good night this time, Hitoshi said in a disappointed voice, emerging from the kitchen while drying his hands with a white napkin. Angel had a few veins bulging from her forehead. Yellow sparks of electricity jumped across her hairs. I swear when I see him again dash. Just let it go, Angel. Come on, deep breaths, Hitoshi said while massaging her shoulders. Angel took a deep breath through her nose and out through her mouth. After repeating the process about 5 times, she relaxed a bit. See there, much better, Hitoshi chuckled almost triumphantly. Thank you, Toshi. Now, how about you just go take a shower? I'll handle things in the house for tonight, Hitoshi offered, his skillful hands doing wonders to release the tense muscles on her shoulders. Dash was the only sound she could produce. Hitoshi was always really good with back rubs. She could use a shower too now that she thought about it, having taken none in at least 7 days. With that in mind, she made her way inside and upstairs to the bathroom. On her way, she saw Tekashi's door to his room slightly open. She took a peek inside and saw both Tekashi and little Ray watching something on the computer, both looking to be completely invested. They were sitting on the same chair with little Ray between Tekashi's legs. She smiled at the sight. Tekashi had promised to be a big brother to Ray, and they seemed to be inseparable right now. She hoped they would stay that way. With that thought, she made her way to the shower. This was interesting. Apparently, Tekashi wanted to watch some superhero shows with him. They were both sitting on a chair watching some show about a guy named Justice Man. All in all, it was a typical Japanese kid show with dramatic sound effects and scores, with the main character being very loud and energetic. But it was still entertaining, he wasn't gonna lie. Like those old Power Ranger shows from way back when. His older brother made some comments here and there, explaining who everyone was to him, not that he could understand him though. Correction, he could scarcely understand him, he could piece together the general idea of what he was saying. This whole language looks like it was a lot easier to learn with enhanced intelligence than he expected. Granted, he still couldn't grasp it completely yet, but he was getting there. His attention was returned to the screen where Justice Man could be seen falling down the side of a building head first towards the ground. He was holding his hands in an X formation. Suddenly he shouted, "Justice Man, cross chop," in English, and brought both his hands down in a double karate chop, crushing some kind of sea monster that was below him. Tekashi suddenly pumped his fist in the air with a triumphant smile, while Ray looked on with amusement. Never had an older brother, wouldn't mind it be this one, he thought with a serene smile. After the brief celebration, Tekashi yawned, covering his mouth as he brought his hand down. He reached to turn off the computer while saying something. It must be time for bed. No complaints here, I could fall asleep any moment, Ray said in thought, breaking into a small yawn himself. After Tekashi turned off the computer, he carefully picked up Ray in his arms with a grunt and walked out of the room. Now standing in the corridor in front of his room's door, he swiveled right and headed towards another room adjacent to his. He grabbed the doorknob with one hand, turned it, and pulled. The room was decorated with a crib, one of those sets of things that would hang over it, and a nightlight. Soft and round toys littered the floor of the room. Weirdly enough, there was also a bed of reasonable size present as well. It didn't belong to his brother as far as he can tell, as in the previous room there was one single-person bed as well. After a moment of thought, he formed a theory. Perhaps because the crib is temporary, his parents decided to buy a bed in advance, neutralizing the need of purchasing it when the time eventually came. Good choice, he said in thought. There was no way he was going to sleep in a crib every night for now. Though his brother seemed to not know that babies his age sleep in one, as he was not making any turns to it, but instead was headed straight for the bed. Knew him for not even a day yet, and he's a better older brother than I ever was. Tekashi then placed little Ray in bed, making sure he got as comfortable as he could with soft touches. After a satisfied nod at his work, he said something to his little brother, which Ray assumed was a good night, then turned around and walked out with an overly exaggerated walk. Ray chuckled as his brother closed the door behind him, leaving him alone in the room with only his nightlight for luminosity. Ray cleared his throat and sunk into his bed, under soft covers, and gazed outside the window to the ocean. Tonight was a full moon, and its light got reflected off of the ocean water, forming a path of white lights that led up to its pale surfaces on the water. Ray couldn't help but dream what it would feel like to walk on the surface of the lunar body when presented with such a clear picture tonight. That is beautiful, he said delightfully in thought before he drifted off soundly to sleep. He woke up not 3 hours later to a severe ache in his stomach. And since his body was still very frail, it only hurt a lot. So much so that he was pretty sure he cried. His parents rushed in soon after, picked him out of his bed with confused and panicked faces, briefly checked it for any mess he might have made, then carried him off to the toilet. His mother's glare never leaving his father's nervous smiling face as they helped Ray get some relief on the toilet. Ray was just weirded out. No one had ever stepped in the toilet with him to help him do his business, and this was just plain embarrassing. It was an experience that would forever be engraved in his brain. Not to mention he had to wear a diaper too. After they were done, his mother cleaned him up and took him back to his room, and much to his objection placed him in his crib. He watched the both of them walk out, first his father, then his mother, and upon her closing the door to his room, he heard her berate his father through the walls. Now very annoyed that he had to sleep in the crib, and the image of his mother helping him in the toilet still fresh in his mind, he went to sleep with a frown on his face. The next morning, when Ray awoke to an urge to relieve himself. The sun was barely up right now, but he needed to go to the toilet again. His bladder was practically threatening him to explode. Surprisingly, he was athletic enough to climb out of his crib despite being less than a month old, though he almost smacked his head on the ground when he let go. After picking himself up and crawling to the door, he realized there was no way he was going to be able to open it. Not only was he still too weak to stand on his 2 legs, but the doorknob was also at least double his height in its placement even if he could. So he just sat down flat on his butt and contemplated on a way to get out. After much thought, and with no other way, he reluctantly called for his parents by yelling as loud as he could. After a few moments, footsteps could be heard shuffling towards his room from the corridor. Ray mentally prepared himself for the ensuing embarrassment of having someone help him in the toilet again. The doorknob turned and opened outward, revealing the sight of his still drowsy mother. She yawned, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes, then made her way inside. She could not see little Ray from her perspective and had unknowingly kicked him. Luckily though, Ray brought his arms up just in time to block it. The sudden bump on her foot brought her attention to the floor, where she found her little baby lying on his back, hands brought up to protect himself. When she pieced together that she had just accidentally kicked her son, she began to apologize profusely while picking him up, briefly contemplating what he was doing on the ground in the first place. She then figured that he called for them as he needed to go to the toilet. She checked his diaper, finding it to still be in perfect shape. That was strange. Even last night when he cried for them, his diaper was spotless. She only changed it as she wanted to stay on the safe side. It was almost as if her baby was already potty trained. She also noted that he did not appear to be crying when she entered his room, but rather was just calling for them. Again, she couldn't disagree with the doctor when he said that her baby was odd. With that thought, she helped little Ray with his business in the bathroom. After they were done, she changed his diaper just in case and went downstairs to the kitchen to prepare some breakfast. When they arrived, she placed Ray on his stool by the table and headed behind the counter to begin cooking. She began to pressure cook the rice, prepare the eggs and flavorings first. Then she took a bowl and a cereal box from one of the cupboards as well as a pot. She poured the contents of the box into the pot, which Ray immediately recognized to be the milky stuff they were trying to feed him the previous night. She took some milk from the fridge and poured it in as well. Ray just watched on, not looking particularly forward to his morning meal, but it couldn't be helped. When he tried food he would normally eat, it resulted in a cramp in his belly. Despite how good it tasted, he did not want to get that kind of cramp again. After a while, the cereal seemed to be ready. His mother turned off the stove, poured the contents out into a bowl, and placed it aside to cool. After a while, breakfast for the others seemed to be done as she turned the stove completely off. She then took Ray's food and a spoon and headed towards him. She arrived next to him just as the doorbell rang out. Now who could that be? She asked no one in particular. She placed Ray's food on his mini table before standing up to answer the door. She opened the door to find Saki, still wearing her glasses in a light green tracksuit, a few drops of sweat on her forehead. Her dark blue hair was now styled in a single ponytail behind her head. "Good morning, ma'am," she politely greeted, breath a bit haggard. "Went for a run on your way here?" Angel asked her, smiling with one eyebrow raised. "Yeah, have to stay in shape." "Well, come on in, make yourself at home." Angel ushered her in by stepping to the side and holding her right hand out towards the living room. With a nod, Saki made her way inside the house, trying her best not to collapse on the couches. "Go to the kitchen, get yourself some water," Angel suggested with a gesture of her head. Saki nodded and walked past her. As she made her way to the entrance of the kitchen, something inside caught her attention, prompting her to lightly gasp. What is it?" questioned Angel as she made her way beside her. What she saw in the kitchen also garnered her attention. Ray was still sitting on the stool and he was currently digging his way through his breakfast on his own accord. Both Saki and Angel just stood there observing until the silence was broken by Saki. "That's Ray, right?" she inquired, to which Angel nodded after a bit of thought. "He looks to be a good boy," Saki added with a smile, to which Angel nodded again. After a bit more staring, Saki turned to the kitchen counter. Steaming canisters and pots could be seen atop it. "Ah, Miss Omura, you shouldn't have." Indeed, it was her job to handle the household's chores, and it would be shameful for her if she had left it to be handled by the matron who had been pregnant not too long ago. "What?" Angel asked in a way that made her sound like she really didn't know what she was talking about. Saki then pointed to the counter, her mouth forming a small pout. "Oh, that? It's nothing. Ray woke me up early, so I thought might as well make breakfast while I'm down here." She waved it off with a small laugh. "Besides, it's the least I could do." Saki remained silent, unsure of what to say. She then gazed over to the little baby eating by himself. After a moment of silence, Angel turned to head upstairs. Do you mind watching him for a moment? My husband and Tekashi will be up shortly, and I have to change for work. Oh, not at all. With that, the two women departed from each other. Saki made her way to the baby she now knew as Rei. Now what do we have, Hugh? She said, puffing her cheeks, spoke in the tone most adults would use to talk to babies, trying to catch his attention. She succeeded, and she saw him lift his face from his meal to turn towards her. Much to the surprise of Saki, there was not a single trace of food present on his face. He appeared to have been eating with skill and purpose. Something not many children his age would know how to do. She briefly looked away to the kitchen's entrance where his mother had gone, perhaps to ask her about his odd behavior. But Angel had already left upstairs to go get changed. Looking back to Rei, he was still looking at her with a judgmental look. She felt like she was in the presence of someone much older than he was supposed to be. Ehem, do you need anything? She asked him, not really expecting an answer. But much to her confusion, after squinting his eyes for a bit, he opened them wide as if he pieced together what she said. What followed both astonished and scared her quite a bit as he actually shook his head, seeming to understand the question she had asked him. Before she could dwell on the thought, she heard light footsteps coming from the kitchen entrance. It was Tekashi. Morning, Saki-san. He greeted her, rubbing his eyes with a yawn. Have you seen Rei? I checked his room and he wasn't in his bidash. He stopped himself as she saw him sitting on his little tall stool. Oh, you're up already? He asked his little brother, who looked at him intensely, after which he slowly nodded. Wow, you're an early riser, huh? I heard somewhere that waking up early is a good habit. I guess that means I just have to start waking up early too. Can't be a proper role model if I didn't. He declared enthusiastically, not even bothered by the fact that his brother could now understand what he had said. It had been a while since his parents and brother went out to their respective destinations for the day. Rei was left alone with Saki, spending the day sitting on the couch watching the television in the family room, the easternmost room in the house. The morning sunlight coming in from the high windows on the wall to Rei's left bathed the house in light air. The family's house was beautiful to say the least, so was the location. Having been located on the Cape of Japan's east shorelines, the property sat near a tourist spot called Irozaki Ocean Park in Minamizu. Enjoying all the benefits that came with having a house near the seashore, while still having direct and reliable access to basic facilities like clean water. Rei found out that his father, Hitoshi, had already wanted to live in these parts, the ocean park being the location he had proposed to Rei's mother, Angelina. As such, the locale held insurmountable importance to him, and to Angelina as well. Rei smiled when he recalled the story. One of the things he heard from his mother, he barely put together given that she told him that story in Japanese. The family must have been somewhat well off. He noticed that the TV was exceedingly large and boasted a ridiculous resolution of 32K. He theorized that widescreen, high-quality televisions were more commercially available now in the future. Speaking of which, the year on the calendar was surprisingly large too, displayed as being 2365. Surprising given how little the advancements humans seemed to have made in technology. Sure, the TV was impressive, but 300 years, it was a long time. Though Rei supposed he could help in that aspect. He not only jumped to another world but to the future as well, it seems. What was also surprising was language. 300 years is again a long time. Enough for a lot of changes to happen to a language. Yet English, the only language he understood, seemed to stay exactly the same. He couldn't say the same about Japanese, as he couldn't really tell. Think of the 1700s, and how much the way people spoke changed in contrast to the 21st century. Perhaps it did change through the years, a lot. But it eventually turned back exactly to the way Rei was familiar with, which was convenient and unrealistic, but Rei was all the more thankful for it. He was currently surfing through the channels, pressing buttons on the remote, looking for shows to watch. He found out that learning to speak Japanese was best achieved when one just heard Japanese all the time. Eventually, if you get exposed to a language enough, you start to piece together what it meant. Briefly, he switched to a news channel, went past it for a moment before going back again. What the channel was currently showcasing was a burning building, a very large one at that. The smoke coming from the windows stretched towards the skies until it could not be seen, and around the outside, several people in costumes were frantically running around. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Ray had to hold in a laugh. He did so because the people in the costumes were obviously heroes on the job. But they looked absolutely ridiculous. When someone heard the words hero, most would imagine somebody in a badass suit, accompanied by an equally badass cape, flowing majestically in the wind. Not a man whose costume resembled that of a fire hydrant. There was also a guy with a literal shark hoodie that looked like he got it from the local convenience store running around, dousing the flames. All in all, very silly, yet very awesome. He had to be honest, who can say they dressed up like a fire hydrant with absolute confidence, and still got people to take you seriously as a hero? Ray sure couldn't, and he would salute anyone who managed to do it. Disregarding their strange outfits, all heroes present seemed to have water-related powers or some degree of immunity to fire. The water heroes would try to contain the flame, while the others would rush in and out, carrying as many people as they could to safety. Ray watched on more and more engrossed with fascination. Wow, they look really silly, but they know what they're doing. But in the back of his mind, something nagged at him. Something odd. He felt as though he had seen some of these people before. Nah. He quickly bashed the thought away with a flick of his wrist. If he had seen them somewhere, he would definitely remember, he was sure of it. The sound of a vacuum cleaner cut through the program, whirling in from the door to the living room. Their housemaid Saki came in wearing wireless earphones, and a full-body apron holding the vacuum cleaner with her right hand. She jerked it back and forth. Ray's stomach grumbled as soon as he caught sight of her, though the sound of the vacuum cleaner muffled it greatly. He turned his head towards the clock above the TV and saw that it was about time for lunch. He waved Saki from his seat, and when she saw him, she immediately turned off the machine and plucked out her earphones. He pointed to the clock to show her it was already noon, and Saki gasped, picking him up before marching to the kitchen right away, leaving the TV on the news channel. When they both left the room, a giant man with blonde hair styled into two horns came onto the scene with his jolly laughter ringing out. Saki was not going to lie. This new baby was freaky. Not only did he seem to know what she was saying from time to time, he understood things no baby could possibly have at his age. Things such as time, how to switch channels, how to crawl. Hell, he even knew what he had to do at the toilet. He only called her to unlock the doors or place him on the seat, somehow never having an incident up until now. She was currently watching him feed himself the baby cereal she had prepared for him. Sure, the baby being smart enough to know these things was a benefit to her. She just couldn't help getting freaked out. When he finished, he politely placed the spoon in the bowl. Then proceeded to make gestures with his hand towards her. He was drawing the shape of a box while moving his hands about, index finger held out. Saki immediately knew he wanted to go back to watching their television set. She took his bowl to the sink to clean them later and picked him up to go place him on the couch again. She reasoned that maybe he had an intelligence-enhancing quirk to explain away his intellect. But can he get one this young? As Ray now sat comfortably on the couch again. He was watching the same children's cartoon he and his brother were watching the previous night. Justice Man, kick! The loud man on the screen cried out, flying across the ground with one leg pointing forward. When he reached his target, he sent it flying. After striking a pose, he then pointed to the camera. There's no need to fear when Justice Man is here, he declared before the screen transitioned to the credits. Ray let out a little laugh. Hey, I'm getting it. I understood what he was saying. He celebrated by doing a dance, although due to his weak body, the only part that could dance were his arms, which he waved up and down. After the celebration was over, his thoughts then ran to something. Something he hadn't tried to do in a long time. What if I could? So, perked, he muttered softly in Japanese. Upper, super. His face lit up with joy after he tripped through a lot of words in his attempt. Finally, I can speak. He could speak. So, after about a week of silence, his facial muscles and vocal cords were finally developed enough to talk with. Granted, it was still difficult, but that didn't matter right now. Right now, all that mattered was this feeling of accomplishment he was feeling. He was so ecstatic right now, he had to tell someone. Saki. He stuttered a bit with the S in her name. Saki. He called again. After a while, hurried footsteps could be heard coming down the stairs before Saki entered the room. When she entered, her eyes were wide and she looked like she had seen a ghost. After studying every corner of the room, she turned to him. Did you call me? She asked the baby, sitting on the couch uncertainly with a fearful expression. Wise, came his reply, clear as a reflection from a freshly cleaned mirror. Saki began to breathe really fast before with a hand coming up to hold her chest as she fainted, collapsing to the ground. Saki. Saki. Ray called from the couch, attempting to crawl his way towards her. Climbing down from the edge of his seat, he got on all fours and crawled over to her, all the while he yelled her name in worry. He now sat beside her unconscious body on the floor, having crawled to her. As you can imagine, there was little a toddler could do to move a fully grown, unconscious woman. He just positioned her body to be less uncomfortable. The body lying flat, facing upwards with arms to the side and legs straight. Ray was contemplating whether or not talking to people at this age was ideal. Sure, not being able to talk would be frustrating, but he ran the risk of grabbing unwanted attention to himself if he did. If people knew about his ability to speak at such a young age, they would surely want answers which would cause his parents too much trouble. Despite being with them for barely more than a week, he had grown to like them. But someone had already heard him speak, which was Saki. While there was a chance no one would believe her if she claimed Ray could talk, and the chance she could write off the whole ordeal as being a delusion or dream, there was still the chance someone might believe her. Ultimately, he decided to tell Saki about it and hoped she would not faint again. After about 30 minutes of waiting, Saki started to stir. She winced before opening her eyes, bring up her hands to clutch her scalp while attempting to sit up. When she opened her eyes, she was greeted with the sight of the one that caused her to faint in the first place. He was currently sitting on her right, flat on his butt, an innocent smile on his face. Saki reached for her phone in her back pocket with great speed and dialed the number of Ray's mother. After a few rings, she picked up. Hello. Saki? The baby can talk. What? The baby can talk? Angel was heard talking to someone through the phone in a hushed manner. I'm sorry, please wait a moment. Saki, I'm really busy right now. Call in about 5 minutes, okay? Wait dash. Miss Omura hung up. She tried to dial again, only to receive a message that said she was busy at the moment. Come on. She tried again, the same result. In the end, she gave up. She then turned her head towards the object of her disheveled state, who smiled innocently at her. She decided to be brave and ask him a question. Can you speak? She got her answer by a nod coming from him. As he did, she felt lightheaded again. Then can you say something? Ray considered for a moment, before saying, Saki, he uttered. He seemed to be struggling a bit with the yes. Saki looked on wide-eyed. After a few moments of catching her breath, she calmed down. This is a lot to take in, she said. Ray agreed wholeheartedly with her. It wasn't every day a baby under a month of age not only understood language but could speak it as well. Your parents, do they know? And no, Ray said with a shook of his head. Oh. So I'm the first one he told, she said in thought. How long have you been able to? Just about a moment ago. Saki was confused. What do you mean about a moment ago? And I was watching the TV. I tried saying something, he explained. So you really did know what we were saying? Saki muttered under her breath in realization. Why only just now? Didn't you try before? I did. Face muscles not as strong enough? Oh. She supposed it made sense, so she didn't inquire further on it. She turned to the side, rubbing her left arm to soothe herself from the situation. How? She suddenly asked as she turned to him, her voice told that she was distressed. How do you even understand these things? Oh, I just do. He knew it was the wish of intelligence, but he bothered not to tell her. But how? How could you figure it out so early? Your brain would have to be unreal. Maybe my mind is just really better than normal. He emphasized his words, attempting to cover up his secrets. In truth, the wish of intelligence, as well as his already developed previous life, had aided a lot. After a while, Saki's shoulders just slumped. A moment of silence later, she started to lightly laugh. Never thought I would ever have a meaningful back-and-forth conversation with a baby. She raised her head to look at him. Are you going to tell your parents? She saw him shake his head. Why not? They deserve to know. I think they would be better not knowing. They may not even see me as their son if they did. He stated firmly. Saki, however, disagreed. What are you talking about? They're the most understanding people I know. She exclaimed while raising both her hands to her side. They won't treat you any differently if they knew. Ray considered for a moment. True, his father, mother, and brother were people with a very good heart. But how would it affect them if they knew their baby boy actually had the mind of a person much older than himself? It would be cruel, but then again, lying to their face would be abusing their trust. Geez, I'm being dramatic. In the end, he decided to lie as a necessary sacrifice. So too would be silence for a few months. He had heard from his previous mother that his genius older brother spoke his first words before he was even a year old. Based on that, he concluded that he should speak in about his 6th month. A few ways away, but he could deal with it. Now, if he could just convince Saki to keep his secret. Please, there is still a chance they wouldn't. He argued in as serious a tone as his baby-like voice allowed, hands held in a pleading gesture. So, he held one finger up and placed it to his mouth, asking her to remain silent. Saki sighed. Fine. With that, she began to pick herself off the floor. You don't need anything, do you? She asked, to which she received a shook of his head. She dusted herself off and attempted to go about her day normally, though she doubted she could do it now with the knowledge of Ray's absurd quirk. Indeed, she had concluded that the reason for Ray's intelligence was due to a mutant-type quirk that granted the user a higher form of brain function. It was the only plausible explanation to her, as she had heard that mutants were born with a quirk instead of manifesting it at a later age. She had heard from his mother how odd of a baby he was, even just after the moment he was born. She would try her best to take care of this oddball of a child. When she glanced back, he was crawling to the couch to continue the viewing of his show. She laughed a bit. It was funny that such a clever boy would still find enjoyment out of a show. Like The Adventures of Justice Man. Ray was perfectly comfortable with his life. After causing a girl to faint for the first time ever, he continued to watch the show he and his brother enjoyed the night before. He was so invested that time passed quickly for him. The show, while corny, was quite enjoyable. His attention was caught by the doorbell ringing. He heard Saki making her way to answer it. Who is it? She asked. Your friendly neighborhood employer? Came the jovial reply of his father. She opened the door for him. Hitoshi-sama, you're early, Saki said in mild surprise. He was currently garbed in a white coat, his glasses tucked in his breast pocket. To his side, he was carrying a flat briefcase with some of its paper contents sticking out in small bits. Yeah, thought I'd come home fresh after lunch. Where's Ray? He asked pleasantly, swiveling his head to scan the living room from side to side. Saki's pose straightened. She was shifting uncontrollably in place. A body gesture Hitoshi was all too familiar with. When he took care of Tekashi when he was little, he had never before been that stressed in all his life, not then, not ever. Proved to be quite a challenge? He teased her with a grin, leaning down a bit to look at her almost in a playful, mocking manner. It's not that, it's just. He's OD special, yes special, Saki said with a bit of a mumble while avoiding direct eye contact. One arm grabbing the other over her belly. Hitoshi could say nothing. The demeanor Saki was displaying was less than thrilling. Sure, taking care of an infant could be challenging, but did Ray really prove to be that much of a hurdle that the housemaid would be this traumatized? He decided to see for himself. He was a theoretical physicist, and now a father of 2. Surely he could tame a demon again. The sound of the TV was most abundant in the hallway, booming a very familiar score from the family movie room, beside the kitchen. Justice Man? He thought. He became very well acquainted with that theme song of his during Tekashi's infancy. He made his way to the movie room with quiet steps. When he arrived, he was greeted by the sight of his son, smiling from ear to ear. He suddenly shifted his gaze to him, then waved enthusiastically with his right hand. Hitoshi flashed him a smile of his own. "Glad to see me?" he asked playfully. Ray nodded. Hitoshi walked to the couch then sat beside him. "What are you watching?" he asked the rhetorical question, looking at the screen. Ray then pointed to the screen bouncing on his seat. Hitoshi just laughed. "Oh, that old thing. Tekashi would watch it all the time when he was your age." At the mention of his brother, Ray's enthusiasm seemed to grow, which his father noticed. "Yes, your brother would never stop watching it," he stated playfully. "To be honest, it was pretty annoying. The intro song's still engraved in my head." As he said that, Ray's mood looked like it dimmed. He glared at him and puffed out his cheeks, which only came off as adorable. "Hey, don't look at me like that. I can't say the show itself was bad. It just came off as irritating if you hear it all the time." He tried to justify himself to his baby son, which didn't look like it was working. "Not convinced, huh?" He thought for a moment before an idea struck him. "Oh, well, how about this?" He opened his briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out a small cube with different colors on every side. Little grids ran across the surface, dividing the faces into 54 equal squares. It was a Rubik's Cube. Hitoshi then held it up to his son's face, turning and twisting it on his wrist so that he saw every side of it. "Pretty cool, huh?" His attempt to win his son's favor over with this gift worked. Ray himself knew exactly what it was. The only thing that crossed his mind at that time was what the hell was his father thinking? What was a baby supposed to do with a Rubik's Cube? "It's called a Rubik's Cube. Here, watch." As he said that, he began to turn it on its various axles, scrambling the colors. "Now, you're supposed to arrange the colors on the same sides. Think you can do that?" Ray took it from his palm with his tiny two hands and began inspecting it with a fascinated look. "But now while you're at that, I'm gonna change upstairs, okay?" With that he got up from his seat and walked away, taking his case with him. On his way out, he thought to himself, he doesn't seem that bad, so what's got Saki all worked up? Ray was closely inspecting the toy in his hand. In his previous life, he never did get the gist of solving one of these things. But now he would try. He decided to start from the blue face. He saw several pieces of it on the other sides. He turned his right, ending up with a middle blue piece directly beside the center blue piece. He did the same with the left and made a top corner piece coming into view. He breathed out. "I can do this." He then adorned a look of determination, turning the various joints with purpose. Hitoshi had changed to his casual outfit when he sat at his desk, unpacking the various documents and papers from his briefcase to his table. The files contained various blueprints and design schematics for many different types of machines. He worked under an institute of science that studied quantum physics. His particular job was to design their various mechanisms and tech, making it so that they would be able to monitor and record the intricate behaviors of particles to the subatomic level. Their facility specialized in the study of quarks and their operations. But so far, they have gained no results for their efforts. Every time they thought they were close to figuring it out, they would always come across a new wall. Overall, it was very frustrating. He decided to just not think about it for now and take a shower, perhaps even a bath. Suddenly, an idea sprang to mind. Ray hasn't taken bath yet, has he? He smiled brightly when the idea came to mind. It was Japanese culture that a parent should bathe with their children, helping and teaching them how to clean themselves properly until they could do it themselves. With that, he decided it would be an excellent time to do it. Unbeknownst to him, Ray downstairs had the biggest shiver he ever had go up his spine. When he went downstairs, the sweet aroma coming from the kitchen caught his attention. He decided to check it out first before taking Ray to bathe with him. Saki was seen at the stove, busily stirring and maintaining the various types of food on the stove. He saw that she was preparing rice at the pressure cooker, salmon was on the frying pan, and another pressure cooker with its contents hidden. Though judging by the scent it gave off, it was beef. It was Hitoshi's favorite. "Oh, didn't see you there," Saki said with a sigh as she was a bit startled by Hitoshi's sudden comment from the kitchen door. "Smells good. Is Ray still in there?" he asked as he pointed to the movie room. Saki nodded before she turned back to the stove. He then went on his way to the movie room and saw that Ray was back to watching the TV. "Okay, little buddy, what say you and I take a bath?" he asked before picking him up and heading to the bathroom, leaving no moment for Ray to argue. On his way out, he missed the Rubik's Cube that was present on the coffee table, which had all its corresponding colors arranged in groups of 9 on every side. It had been solved. The crying of a baby sounded across the evening. A while after they had arrived in the bathroom, started to breathe really fast before doing everything in his power to get out. It seemed he did not like taking a bath. When it was apparent there was no escape, he resorted to crying. Suffice it to say, his father had a very difficult time bathing him. When it was over, little Ray had a pouty look on his face. When his father carried him off to the bathroom, he had no idea what to expect. When it finally did click for him, however, it was too late. He thought being helped by his mother to pee was the worst harassment he had to suffer. Yet getting in the bath with his father proved to be a much worse fate, it seemed. When they got out, Ray was dried by his father first before he dried himself. His older brother had already returned home from school long before they got out. His father then asked Saki to prepare dinner, something about his mother running late. So she did. They were all seated at the table now, paying their respects before commencing their meal. His brother, like the previous night, tried to feed him the food from the table. Luckily, his father stopped him. He tried to argue, but his father seemed persistent. Why not? He had it last time and he was fine. Tekashi said. No, he was not. His mother and I had to make do with 5 hours of sleep because of his bellyache, his father explained. Really? Oh. Tekashi gave Ray a look of sympathy. Man, that sucks. It's really good. He emphasized his point by grabbing a large chunk of meat before gulping it down whole, releasing a squeal of satisfaction. You're not really helping me, Ray thought bitterly. While he knew eating that would probably be suicide, it was very tempting indeed. But he had to endure and eat his baby cereal, no matter how bland it tasted. The doorbell rang out. Saki wiped her lips with a napkin before getting up to answer it. It turned out that it was Ray's aunt from his mother's side of the family, Margaret Satyuman. She was a short woman, only standing at 5 feet 2 inches. She had short dark brown hair and hazel red eyes. She was also very petite in appearance, save for her overwhelmingly thick legs. But despite her harmless looks, she was in a special police officer's uniform, the SWAT division, a badge that read demolitions in English and kanji was on her left shoulder. Angel's not home? She asked Hitoshi. Her voice, while sounding to be quite young, held a tone of maturity. Not yet, she's running late. Shame. Hitoshi nodded. I take it Kazu's overseas? He asked, to which he received a nod. Off to Vegas, gambling dash. She stopped short when she suddenly caught sight of an adorable blonde little human sitting on a tall chair. She squeaked before snaking her way to him. Why didn't you tell me you had another baby? She whined, pinching little Ray's cheeks with her hands. I was going to, eventually. He quickly tried to explain. But Maggie could see right through it. You were trying to keep me from him. How dare you? She accusingly pointed a finger at him. I'll have you know the consequences of your actions. But just before she had the time to act, the front door opened and someone stepped inside. That person being Angel, the matron of the house. Maggie? What an unexpected surprise, she said sweetly, taking off her coat and hanging it by the front door. The person she was referring to simply stood there, petrified. A cough caught her attention to the man sitting by the table. What's wrong? I thought you were going to show me something? He gave her a smug smile, to which her right eye twitched. Her shoulders were grabbed by soft, yet firm hands, dragging her to one of the chairs by the dinner table. Please, sit down and I'll get you something to eat. I'm sure Saki made a most wonderful meal. Before she knew it, she was sitting at their table, eating. While her sister Angel was a kind and wonderful woman, she could be scary? Yes, scary when she was angry. And she did not want to experience that right now. Make no mistake though, she was furious at Hitoshi for keeping such a secret, such as hiding his newly born son from her. But she would tolerate him for now. She glanced at the adorable little guy from her seat again, his very pinchable cheeks calling out to her hands. "What's his name?" she finally asked, eagerly looking up to her older sister. "Rei, Omura Rei," Angel said with a blissful smile, looking to the boy with her head slightly tilted. He smiled at her from across the table, and she smiled back delightfully. "Huh, after old Pop Pop?" she asked while rubbing her chin, to which her sister nodded in confirmation. "Oh boy, isn't he just the smallest ray of golden sun?" she squeaked again when Ray gave her a rather lazy wave. Mom, can Ray and I stay up late again?" Angel turned to Tekashi, giving her the puppy dog eyes. "No," she stated flatly, derailing all his hopes for her approval. "Please," he persisted, almost squirming in place while rubbing his knuckles together in front of his chest. "No, you can't, Tekashi. Remember, your little brother needs his sleep to get big and strong like you are," she explained before the boy tried to argue further, bringing her hand to ruffle his dark brown hair. "Ah, okay, fine." He looked gloom for a moment before his mood brightened up again, running to Ray to deliver him the news. She heard her younger sister chuckle from her chair. "They grow up so fast, don't they?" The first time she saw Tekashi, he was about as high as her knee, hiding behind his mother when they came to visit. "Yes, they do." "Hey, how's Bree doing?" she asked her sister. "Bree? Oh, she's fine. She's graduating college next month. Can you believe it?" She turned up and asked her instead with a big smile. "She is? Oh my, good for her." She shared the same look. "You must be quite proud." Seems like only yesterday when she first talked to me." Maggie smiled in remembrance, turning up to look at the ground. "When she took her first steps?" Angel shared her smile, looking at her sister. "Now she's an adult." Her own woman Maggie's voice was shaky, and few tears spilled, which caught Angel a bit off guard when her sister sniffed in through her nose. "Sorry, got a little emotional there at the end." She wiped herself off, then got up. "I think I'll get going." "So soon?" "Yeah. I was only making sure on something." She muttered the last part to herself and went to the baby to pinch his cheeks one last time before leaving. "Ciao," she said as she stepped out of the house. After watching her leave, Angel turned to Hitoshi with a serious look. "She didn't destroy anything, did she?" "Nope, you got here just in time," Hitoshi explained to her. She breathed out a sigh of relief. "Why don't you take Ray to bed tonight? Saki and I will take care of things here." "Are you sure?" Hitoshi sounded concerned. "You don't want to take a shower first? You just got home." "I'm fine. Besides, you should tuck your son in too from time to time." She flashed him a smile. Hitoshi uncertainly complied and took Ray in his arms. "Well, if you say so." With that, he left the two women to their business. He took Ray to the second-floor toilet first to let him do his thing first before taking him to his room. There, before he placed him into his crib, he turned off the lights and turned on his night light, then sat at the bed to read him a bedtime story. Back down at the kitchen, Saki was having a hard time acting like everything was normal. "So, did little Ray cause any trouble?" Angel turned to Saki with a knowing smile. "Oh, he didn't?" "Good, that's good. But you seem quite shaken." She straightened her back from her spot at the sink, flicking her wrist a few times to dry them before she reached for the towel. Saki stopped what she was doing for a moment and looked conflicted before continuing again. "Something wrong?" Angel asked her. "No, ma'am. It's just he's a special boy." "Did something happen with him?" she asked, voice concerned. "No, nothing happened. He's just a bit smart for his age, that's all." Saki quickly excused herself by taking the various plates and bowls to the sink to do the dishes. Angel looked at her quizzically before shrugging, continuing to clean the table and the floor. "Smart, huh?" She had to agree with what Saki had said. There was no denying that her baby was indeed smart for his age. 5 months had passed since his rebirth. His body's growth shows it too. Now able to walk on 2 legs, much to the astonishment of his parents. His legs were still weak, but it was not about the strength he discovered, but rather balance, and having already known how to walk allowed him to do so at so early an age. Saki and he were home alone again. All members of the family had gone out. "Now if you need anything, just let me know," Saki said as she washed the dishes. I will." he said clearly. All the muscles that allowed him to speak were even more developed now, enabling him to form sentences and complex words with minimal difficulty. Moreover, the relationship between him and the housemaid turned into something special as she was the only one he had for conversation. Over the weeks, they spoke more and more and got to know each other very well. For all the little things there was to know about him, she had very interesting stories to tell, becoming a sort of unofficial big sister to him. A person he could share his thoughts with. Today was a warm day. The sun shined brightly, basking the seaside in a light that was almost too bright. There was barely any clouds, so the clear blue sky was a most abundant sight, that and the blue sea that stretched far away. Sat on the family room couch on the east side of the house. Almura surfed through the channels, looking for something interesting to watch for entertainment when the news channel caught his attention. We're here now at the scene of a battle between a group of villains calling themselves the Salvation Army and a handful of heroes. These villains appear to be demanding that the government should provide food and shelter free of charge to individuals that don't want to work. A female reporter was seen on a helicopter, surveying the area around the battle from the air. Oh! Ray placed the remote to his side and tilted his head in bewilderment. That sounded crazy. If you don't want to work, why should the government provide you with their services for no reason at all? Not only was it a waste of resources, but these groups also appeared to be tearing the city apart just because they didn't receive such treatment. As you can see, the damages the battle has caused is immense. We're not sure if the heroes can. What's that really? This just in, we have just received word that the new #1 hero, All Might, is on his way. The reporter said as she adorned a look of happiness. The dash? Oh? Ray suddenly turned up from his seat with an even deeper look of confusion. Wait, I thought this was the news channel? It wasn't too far off the assumption that there would be a live-action My Hero adaptation eventually. It was just the matter that he was so far flung into the future that making a movie now would likely be pointless. Even if there was such a thing as the My Hero Academia here in the first place. But behold, to his surprise, the camera zoomed in on a giant of a man. Muscular beyond reasonable constraints, the man had a vibrantly colored golden hair, of which protruded two horn-like shapes from the very front. Shadows somehow formed on the sharp engravings of his chiseled face as they hid his eyes, even though the sun was at its highest height for the day. He stood on one of the building's top, standing dangerously close at the very edge of the concrete, one foot dangling over while the other stood firm. Fear not, citizens. These nice young men won't find it necessary to bother any more of your time, he announced charismatically, holding his grin. He stood tall and proud, young some may call it, but even then, most of the population of Japan had known his name. The reason being, his one leg behind coiled, and a surge of power dominated the air. That I am here. Declaring this loudly, he leapt off the building into the group of terrorists below. Huzzah! He cried once more as he landed with a wham, the impact of his body hitting the pavement managing to launch even some of the more bulky bunch of the Salvation Army into the air. Ray then went to the channel list only to confirm that he was indeed watching the news channel. Saki? Saki? He called out in a panicked voice. Why, what's wrong? She entered the room, all gasping and alarmed. Not 5 seconds later. Ray pointed to the screen with a trembling finger, and turned to the housemaid with an expression marred with concern. What's going on? He asked her uncertainly, voice as shaky as his hand held out. Oh, that's All Might, she said in a calm voice after taking a moment to inspect the TV. She may have assumed he was made afraid by his appearance. Oh, Might? Ray was confused as to how familiar she seemed to be of him. Yeah, I know he may look scary, but he's the #1 hero. So there really is no one safer to be around. She laughed as she said that. No, Ray thought. No way. He was now thinking out loud. Saki was confused. Did Ray find him so scary that he deemed him unworthy of being a person of such high regard? Now, don't you have that kind of mindset, young man. I'll have you know that he has done a lot of good ever since his debut. She huffed as she marched over to him. No, it's not that. He shook his head, then looked out the living room window towards the ocean and the bright blue sky. It's just well, he said with a wide smile. Saki was even more confused now. Did he not find him scary but admirable instead? If so, what caused him to say what he did just a moment ago? Deciding to just now think about it, she shrugged and turned to leave. "Oh God," she heard him say as she left. She wondered what could be on his mind this time. When that God had asked him to make a wish, the least he could have done was tell him exactly where he was going. If he had done that, he would have wished for something a lot more powerful than the ability to simply control technology. For instance, telekinesis, super healing, super strength, or even just the ability to move really fast. He had watched the series and had witnessed just how broken and overpowered some of the abilities could be. He still had no idea how powerful his own power was, but even if it was of the same power level he was imagining when he made that wish, some of these people could still wipe the floor with him. That is, if he didn't start preparing for them now. With enough information and experience, there was still a chance he could outperform them in the future. Perhaps acquire knowledge of the sciences and technology this early on in life. There was still the option of not facing them at all, but who in their right mind would choose a normal life in the world of My Hero? With that in mind, he set his sights on acquiring as much knowledge as possible before he eventually gets exposed to such beings in the future. "Saki," he called out again, hoping she would not get annoyed with his constant requests of her aid. After a while, Saki entered the living room. "Yes?" Thankfully, she didn't sound the least bit irritated. "Dad has a library in his office, right?" he asked. "Yes. Though I wouldn't exactly call a couple of bookshelves a library," she said as she shrugged. "Can you take me there?" he asked, only to receive a flat stare, followed by a ridiculing laugh. "What are you going to do there, read? There's only science books and other stuff," she said through her laughter. Yeah. Is it that funny for me to want to do that?" he asked in irritation with a defensive huff. What's 2 plus 2? She asked him instead with a mocking and condescending smile. 4, Ray answered with a bit of irritation as he turned to the side. "Easy, right? Now, what's 7 times 7? 49, Ray answered immediately again. Saki's smile faded a bit. 103 plus 204 multiplied by 8 divided by 4. She asked slowly as she did the calculation in her head. 614. He answered immediately again. Saki's smile disappeared. "Okay, that's just scary," she said, sounding genuinely impressed with traces of fear. "Fine, come along." She sighed as she picked him up, carrying him off to his father's office on the first floor. There was a desk in the center of the room. Several degrees and certificates were hanged on the walls of the room as decoration, also serving as a declaration of his father's achievements. Hiroshi was a man of rightful pride, it seemed. On one corner of the room, there were 3 bookshelves stocked to the brim with works on science, mathematics, and engineering, barely having little slips of space between them. Saki walked up to the books, carrying Ray in her arms. "Now, choose which one you would like," she told him pleasantly, cracking up internally from the sheer absurdity of a baby wanting to read up on such things. Ray then looked around before taking to a book with a dark, looming shade of turquoise for the cover. "That one," he declared as he pointed towards it on the shelf second most to the top on the farthest bookshelf to the right. Saki walked up to it and tilted her head to the side as she grabbed the unusually heavy book. Principia? Mathematica? She read the book's name printed on the sides as she swiveled around towards Hitoshi's workspace. Carrying both the book and Ray in her hands to the office desk, she placed the book down on the table and Ray to the comfortable chair behind the desk. After a few adjustments so that it was high enough for him to reach for the book's pages to turn it, she got up from her knees and looked to the boy on top. "Comfy?" she asked, to which she received a wordless nod, the boy too engrossed in his analyzations of the book's contents. "Okay then, I'll leave you to it," she said with amusement. The small blonde boy, intensely engrossed in a book that was about as tall as he was, made for a surprisingly adorable scene to the housemaid as she turned to leave. She barely subdued the urge to pinch his very pinchable cheeks. As Ray sat there on the padded chair, learning his heart away from the vast book filled with complicated mathematical equations and dense numerical notations. At first, he hadn't imagined he would be able to understand even the first few pages. But pushing on and bracing for the worse, he found that strangely, he could grasp the faintest understandings from the book that could be at least 2,000 pages in volume. With Rei inside the residential office, Hitoshi's workspace, Saki was busy with a slightly clogged toilet on the second floor. As the house fell silent with both of them doing their debatably menial activities, 3 knocks echoed through the empty halls. Rei failed to hear it due to a commendable amount of focus, while Saki from the second floor did. She stood silent for a moment, back straightened on her spot in front of the toilet. Currently unsure of the sound she heard, she waited for another to come. 3 knocks came again, and she got up immediately from her seat, almost tripping on a water bucket beside her station. She came out from the door and went right down the stairs just beside the bathroom door. Her hurried steps down may have been reassuring to whoever was on the other side, them maybe having waited for a while. "Who is it?" Saki called out as she arrived at the front door. "It's just me," came the voice of Lucas, Rei's uncle. Saki's blood threatened to rush to her face as she realized who she was speaking to. The person who had teased her nonstop just a few months ago. Saki never had a thing for what people would call the bad boys, but she had to admit, he was quite charming with his looks and his persistently smug tone towards her. "Mr. Lucas, what are you doing here?" she asked with a slightly shaky voice, avoiding his eye as he entered through the doorway. "Just thought I'd take Tekashi for an evening ride." "Where is he?" he asked as he began to look around the house, pacing about with an almost bounciness to his steps. "He's not home from school yet, you're welcome to stay if you'd like," she offered while she followed his movements with her eyes. "Oh, how nice of you to offer." He took off his leather jacket and hung it by the door. "Are the parents home?" "No. So, no interruptions? Just the 2 of us?" His voice was low, snarky, and slightly predatory, but playfully so. "Mr. Lucas, I would ask that you now think of any indecent thoughts about me." She tried to act professional and confront his brazen personality directly. "Your family of my employers, it would be unprofessional." "Ah, you're no fun," he persistently teased with a mocking whine, followed with a laugh. Deciding to pace around for a while before relaxing on the couch in the living room, he made his way to his brother's office. When he entered, he was greeted with a sight he did not expect. "Are?" he asked in complete befuddlement, turning his head to look too at the bookshelves along the walls of the room where a giant spot was missing on the farthest one to the right. The little boy he was talking to just looked up from his ridiculously large book and stared at him, unable to think of anything to do to cover up. "What are you doing?" he asked as he marched over to his baby nephew. When he arrived by his side, he took a look at the book he was reading and saw that it was just a bunch of numbers and mathematical glyphs being arranged into equations. "Can you even understand that?" he asked him in an amused voice, turning to his nephew with an almost condescending yet fearful glint in his eyes. Rei's face, empty of emotion, reflected off of Lucas's deep blue eyes. "I thought not." "Come along." He sighed and briefly rubbed his face and reached around the boy's torso, picking him up into his arms. Rei took to waving his hands about to try and get out of his uncle's grip, but his efforts were at best a slight inconvenience to the grown man. Hey, you're not even going to school yet, and you're already studying. You do that, you're gonna waste a whole lot of your youth, you know?" he stated as Rei still attempted to shake himself out. "Please don't turn out a nerd like Hitoshi," he grumbled under his breath. Then suddenly an idea popped into his head. "Tell you what, why don't you come with Tekashi and me? We'll ride around town and I show you how to properly enjoy life. For kids your age, trust me, you're never going to be this free ever in your life." He had always been a firm believer in living life to the fullest. No person that shared his blood is going to waste away their lives like this. Fortunately, the mention of his older brothers seemed to calm him down well enough. "They're much better for the both of us if you just behave, isn't it?" he stated. "Oh." He heard the voice of Saki coming from behind him. He turned to face her. "Saki, did you know he was reading some book in Hitoshi's office?" he asked as he gestured to the baby in his hand. "No." "Well, he was, don't even know how he got there, or why," he mumbled with a shrug, inspecting the boy in his arms up and down with a strange look in his eyes. "He did? But didn't he want to read it?" Come on, it was maths. As if he could even understand 2 plus 2 right now. He waved off with a snarky laugh. Saki took to argue but decided it would be fruitless to do so. In the end, she just decided to go back to her house duties. As Lucas did his best to entertain the docile baby in his arms, someone had suddenly tried to open the front door with a tackle, only to be stopped by a chain that was attached to the frame. Lucas and Ray turned up towards the noise as the person that made it grunted as they fell to the ground. "Oh, that boy," Lucas said with amusement to his older nephew's antics. The boy had a knack of always rushing into locked doors. He got up from the couch and walked up to where his nephew was currently laying down. "Now, get up. I'll open the door." "Uncle Lucas?" Tekashi's groaning stopped as he suddenly looked up with surprise. "The one and only," his uncle replied as he opened the door. When he did, Tekashi had already gotten up and began circling him with joy. "What are you doing here? Came to see us? Are we going to the city? If we are, can we go to the arcade? Oh, and can Ray come with?" he asked with barely enough time to take a breath. Now settle down," Lucas said. "We will go to the city. But first, take a shower, change into the jacket I gave you, then meet me outside, okay? Is Ray coming with?" he asked with a bit of hesitance. "No," he jokingly said. Tekashi, however, believed he truly meant it. "Then I'm not going," he huffed as he crossed his arms. "I'm just messin' with ya, of course he's coming," he said cheerfully. "Really? I'll get ready right away," he announced joyfully before running past them heading for his room. Lucas chuckled. "Nice spirit that kid's got," he said to himself before making his way to his bike. Lucas was now waiting for Tekashi while leaning on his bike, little Ray in his hands. "I hope you're not afraid of high speeds," he said to his nephew. He knew he tended to drive at speeds slightly above the legal ranges. "Ready?" came the voice of Tekashi, now wearing a black leather jacket over his shirt. He was still wearing his shorts with it, which resulted in a fairly funny sight for his uncle, who began to hold in a laugh. "What, do I have something in my hair?" he asked, concerned as he began running his hand through his hair. "No, you look perfect." "Really?" he asked a bit too enthusiastically. "Yup, now, get on behind and buckle up," he stated as he mounted his bike and started the engine. The bike then began to shake, power evident behind the hum of the engine. Ray never liked riding on bikes, and he was in fact terrified of speed. Tekashi, however, was not scared, rather he was ecstatic. "Let's go," Tekashi shouted as his uncle accelerated, traveling at unreasonable speeds down the road to their house. Ray doing everything he can to calm himself down and not scream. When they arrived in town, things calmed down. They were traveling down the road at a steady pace. Ray's heart still beating heavily from the ride here. He had come to the conclusion that his uncle was crazy. Not only did he endanger the lives of him and his brother with such speeds, he theorized it also spurred general civil unrest. He had no idea how his brother could even yell out "woohoos" in excitement. Their uncle then rode the bike into a parking lot. When he found a suitable place to park, they got off and went on their way, Tekashi running on ahead and Ray being carried by his uncle. "Oh, how about there?" Tekashi said as he pointed at a candy shop, bouncing in place. "You sure? I was planning on taking you to Baskin-Robbins today, but if you insist dash." "Baskin-Robbins?" Tekashi asked enthusiastically, turning to his uncle with a bright, inquisitive look. "Not now though." Lucas did his best to calm the boy, holding his hands to Tekashi's shoulders to keep him from bouncing. "Ah, okay. How about the arcade?" He began to bounce again in Lucas' arms. "That's perfect, lead on little man," he said as Tekashi immediately began running towards wherever this arcade was. Ray, meanwhile, was busy taking in the sights of the city and the people. The thing on the top of his head was, why were they so backwards in technology? Coming here, he had confirmed that it was not just his house but society as a whole that seemed to be less advanced than they were supposed to be. 300 years in a long time, and yet people still appeared to be using regular smartphones. Or even worse, flip phones. He had no idea why people would be using flip phones at an age like this. The only possible reason for him was that they somehow made a comeback and became popular as a new fashion trend. The lack of advancements technologically could now be explained with his new nugget of information, that he was in the world of My Hero Academia. He remembered hearing from one of the characters that when quirks first appeared, the world fell into chaos. Wars broke out, identity crisis spread, and the governments of the world were sent scrambling. As a result, the economy suffered, and thus, less advanced 24th century humanity. It really was a shame. Still, the people themselves were a sight to behold. Seeing it from the screen as a stylized anime was normal. Actually seeing mutants and odd quirk users in the flesh was surreal, to say the least. There was even a guy who had the head of an ant in place of a human one. The billboards displayed multiple commercials for various products. Some of them even interesting. Like a drink that supposedly enhanced the potency of your quirk. He had no idea how authentic it really would be though. After a while of walking, they finally arrived at the arcade. Their uncle walked up to the person sitting at the desk. "Tickets of 3 please," he ordered for all 3 of them. After their tickets were dispensed through a machine, Lucas grabbed them and proceeded to walk inside with his 2 compatriots. As the 3 of them made their way inside, Tekashi took the lead, looking around with excitement. "Oh my god, they have Infiniminer here!" he yelled as he ran towards the machine to play the game. Ray was also looking around, the machines and computers in the building, the processors that ran them, the displays. Something about being surrounded with such things brought a feeling he was not too familiar with. Belonging. In his previous life and especially in this new one, he never really got any sense of belonging anywhere in the world, his family included. But now, being in a place just ripe with machines and technology, he felt oddly at place with them. A place somehow felt like home. He mused that it was his affinity for technologies and such to the sciences. When he wished he would get it, he had never assumed it would work its way into his subconscious as it did. He was jolted out of his thoughts by a triumphant yell coming from his uncle. "Yahihi! Strike!" He celebrated as he gazed towards the screen that displayed the words he just shouted. He was playing a virtual bowling game and he seemed like he was having fun. Ray turned to his uncle from his seat in his arms with an almost astonished look. Though opposed to the idea at first, Ray supposed winding down now was the best thing to do when under such stress as finding out one would face opponents of unimaginable might in the future. Preparing for calamity could wait until later, he reasoned. One particular machine caught Ray's attention. It had a controller in the style of a gun. One could play the game by picking the gun up and shooting the enemies on the screen. His uncle noticed him looking towards it and began to make his way to it. "You want to play that?" he asked as they approached. One of the boy's controllers suddenly turned red, indicating that his character in the game had died. The boy then huffed before trying to smash the controller to the ground in a fit of rage. Only for it to be caught by Lucas. "Better luck next time, kid," he said as he took the controller from him. "Whatever," he snarled before walking away with a stomp in his steps. Ray just glared at him from his seat on a railing around the machine's area. "Don't mind him," his uncle told him, and Ray looked back forward. He probably just had a bad day. "Now, let me show you how a real gamer plays," he stated before activating his controller and blasting away. Ray watched on with fascination as his uncle began decimating everything in sight. One could almost think that he was not actually playing but was instead showing a recording of a perfect run of the game. "Pretty cool, isn't it?" Suddenly came the remark on his older brother who had appeared on his right without his notice. This caused Ray to jump a little. "He's always been really good at these sorts of things," he continued as he watched on with the same fascinated look as Ray from before. "Ah, come and get some," he yelled, lost in the moment. It was amusing to see a man such as his uncle that looked like a street thug, taking enjoyment out of a video game to Ray. A tall blonde man in a black biker's leather jacket blasting and jeering to his heart's content produced a mildly jarring scene. "Yeah, come and get some," Tekashi yelled, copying his uncle, encouraging him from the sidelines. "Game. A new record," a voice announced from the machine, displaying their uncle's score at the top. "Phew," he said as he placed the controller back in its holster. "Worked up quite a sweat," he announced as he wiped away a trail on his forehead. "Tekashi? What are you doing here?" he asked in confusion. He could have sworn he gave him enough money to last the hour. Well, some kids came along. Asked me for their turn to play, so I moved aside. He explained. Asked or demanded? He inquired with his deep voice. Asked. He said nervously. All right then. He said as he shrugged with all traces of seriousness gone. If I may as well ask, where would these kids be? Oh, they're right there, Tekashi said as he pointed towards their general direction. As Lucas followed his finger, he could see that the boys that shooed Tekashi away from his game were all fairly older than him. They also dressed sloppy and practically oozed rebellion. Okay, you two stay here while I go ask them a few questions, he said as he marched towards them. I wonder what he needs to ask them about? Tekashi said in a concerned voice, no clue as to what his uncle was planning while Ray watched on with a grimace. Hey boys. Just wanted to ask you a few questions if you don't mind, he said as he arrived to where they stood playing their game. Huh, what do you want? One of the taller ones asked with a snark. Just wondering if you, by chance, happened to threaten a kid about Yanhai, he said as he made a gesture with his hand. Well, walk away, old man. One boy threatened as they all collectively realized that he was probably a member of the kid's family who had come to confront them for him. Well, that answers my question, he said with a laugh, before bringing his fist down, bonking each and every one of them on the head. Gah. Oh. Hey. Were some of their collective yelps of pain coming from the boys. What was that for? The boy who threatened him whined as a few droplets of tears threatened to spill. Then he had his ears pulled up. Now get out of here. And if I see you picking on some little guy again, I'm kicking you in the ass so hard, my feet would be broken and stuck. And if you didn't know, those kinds don't go out easy. They're gonna have to push me through your entire body to get me out, like an arrow, he said with a balled-up fist. Neither of us want to go through that, believe me. You bastard, just you wait, I'll tell my parents. He threatened him again. Well, you best tell him then. Tell him that Musashi Goran gave you a nice spanking. I'll be waiting on room 117 in John's breakfast and bed in the industrial district, he announced as he released him, his friends picking him up and carrying him outside. This is assault. Harassment. I'll send the cops, you hear? The boy yelled back at him as his friends carried him out of the building. Lucas breathed out a sigh. Whoever you are, if he decides to tell his parents and report it to the police, you have my condolences, person living on room 117 at John's breakfast and bed, he said solemnly with a hand over his chest. With that he walked back to his nephews. As he arrived, he could see that the two brothers were indulging in a one-sided conversation, that is, Tekashi was doing all the talking. So then I said, that's not a pencil, this is a pencil. While I pulled out an unreasonably large pencil, the looks on their faces were priceless. He said with enthusiasm. I always told Mom that pencil was gonna come in handy someday, he added as he looked on. Ray was currently contemplating the reason for his brother's desire to surprise his friends with his large pencil when his uncle came back. All right, you done with your little chat? He said in his signature amused voice. Oh, you're back. I was just telling Ray about that time I brought a giant pencil to show off to your friends. Yeah, quite an interesting story that one, he recalled with a look of deep contemplation as he looked to the ceiling. Anyway, it's that time. Wanna go to Baskin-Robbins? He asked with a knowing grin. Now? Tekashi said with a bit too much enthusiasm. He received a nod. What? Ray, have you ever had ice cream? Well, prepare yourself, he said as he picked him up in his arms. Baskin-Robbins the best. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Lucas sounded alarmed, believing Tekashi to just drop Ray whenever. But after a bit of adjusting, he seemed to be able to carry him just fine. Wow, you got this? He asked as a determined expression made its way onto Tekashi's face as he nodded. I'm a big brother, of course I can carry him, he announced as he began taking clumsy steps towards the arcade's entrance. Okay, lead the way, he said as he politely got out of his way and ushered him onward. Tekashi slowly made his way to the entrance, Ray in his arms as their uncle followed closely behind. Tekashi was still carrying Ray as his face began to turn red from the effort when they got out, which their uncle noticed. All right, little man, I'll take it from here, he said as he took Ray from his arms and into his own, leaving no room for argument. No, Tekashi whined. I could have done that. You did well enough. I'm just Dash. Lucas? Came the rough voice of an adult man. As Lucas looked up, he could see that it was his biker friend, Saranawa Sarazawa. He was dressed in your typical biker outfit, black jacket, and ripped jeans. Tattoos were present all over his face as a smoking cigarette hanged loosely from his mouth. Didn't know you had kids. Lucas, however, was starting to sweat a lot. Took them to an arcade? He asked in confusion as he looked behind them. Yeah, thought it'd be fun for them, you know? He said nervously. Uncle Lucas? You had fun too, remember? You played that game for like half an hour. Tekashi stated as he shook his uncle's jacket, oblivious to his uncle's dilemma. Really now? What game was it? The man asked with amusement as he looked towards Lucas. Nothing. I didn't play any a game in there. He said, attempting to save his situation. So it's true what they say, you are a loser. Don't worry, we all are in our own little way, he said as he walked past him while patting him on the shoulder. When the man walked away, Lucas' head hung low as his eyes emptily stared at the ground. Well, that's my reputation, he muttered in a deflated and pitiful voice. Uncle Lucas, did I do something wrong? Tekashi asked. Let's just go, he said emptily as he made his way forward. Tekashi squeaked out as he ate a spoonful of his frozen delight. Ray ate his own, much smaller serving with a tiny spoon. Their uncle just sat there with a glass of water as he looked on outside. He seemed to have shadows under his brows which hid his eyes, somehow. Uncle Lucas, want some? Tekashi offered a spoonful. He had noticed his uncle's less than stellar mood. And he grunted as he lazily took a swig from his glass of water. Tekashi just lowered the spoonful of ice cream into his mouth. Say, do you have any friends at school? Lucas suddenly asked. Oh yes, plenty. There's Lisa, Hataki, Shimura, Bachu, Hanate, Bob, Asajai Dash. Good friends? His uncle interrupted. Yup, they're the best, he announced as he lifted his spoon with a pumped-up fist. Good, that's good. Then suddenly, a question surfaced. Any girls? Oh yes, Lista, Shimura, Bachu and Thun. He finished with a slight blush. Oh ho ho, someone's got a crush? He asked mockingly, his previous empty mood seeming to have vanished. I do not. He defended himself with a pout. You sure? You seemed very defensive just now. He pushed on with a smirk. And what if I do? I'm sure you have one too, he said as he proceeded to aggressively stuff ice cream into his mouth. Oh, I do, but unlike you, I've already told them about it, he said with a smirk as he took his glass of water up to his mouth. Tekashi huffed as he continued his meal. After the brothers finished eating their orders, they got up and walked up to the shop's counter. That'll be 725 yen, please. The girl at the counter read from the small display. These that much? He said as he took out his credit card with a slight grumble. You're gonna break my heart? Come on? Any chance a cute girl like you would give a discount? He persisted to negotiate, handing her his card while he flaced her a pleading look. Ehem. Sorry, sir, I've already entered the amount, the young girl behind the counter said as she averted her gaze, swiping the card in the machine. Shame, he muttered, defeated sounding as he took back his card and placed it back into his wallet. Well, are we ready to go? He asked his two nephews. Tekashi nodded and began marching towards the exit, Ray in his arms again. As they made their way across the streets, Ray caught sight of a hero walking across the walkway parallel to theirs. His costume was mainly yellow with brown filling on the edges. A fluffy material of what Ray assumed to be fur was garbed around his neck. His entire look could tell you that this man's abilities were animal-based. Oh, that's the hero, Saber, he's pretty new, Tekashi said as he noticed his brothers staring. Huh, a real hero? Ray just thought idly as he wondered what was the deal with the costumes. When they arrived at the parking lot, their uncle got on the bike first. Did you have fun? He asked Tekashi as the boy got on the back seat. With you? Always. He responded with a toothy smile. How about you? Lucas asked the baby on the front and just received a panicked expression looking back. Oh, you're afraid? Don't worry, I won't speed up too much, he said as he equipped his helmet. So chin up, he announced, darting his head up. Let's go, Tekashi said as his uncle twisted the accelerator and spun the bike around and headed for the exit. Ray grunted through gritted teeth as he tried to endure it. He figured that being able to handle moving at high speeds was good training for the future. With any luck, he might be able to get over it. The ride home was tame, a lot tamer than the ride to the city that morning. Perhaps his uncle really did dial down his speed because he had been afraid. The sun was just above the horizon now, its edge making to the waters in the distance. Tangerine yellow lights reflected off the calm ocean water, as a salty air dominated the smell of the wind. This arrangement made Ray reminiscent on the day his parents brought him home, unable to take his sights away from the setting sun. "Daw man, that's a nice view," his uncle commented while his hand loosened a bit on the acceleration, the Harley iron slowing down slightly. "You boys sure are lucky." Tekashi moaned. The massive amounts of frozen sustenance he had consumed were starting to make their way back up to his mouth. "Now hold on just a bit longer, we're almost there," Lucas reassured his nephew as he picked back speed. Ray, for his part, was starting to get used to the velocity increasing again and was not quite bothered, much to his relief. After about a minute and a half of riding back home, the trio finally arrived on the driveway to the Omura house. "Go, go, go," their uncle commanded urgently as they got off the hastily parked Harley. Tekashi ran straight to and into the house. Lucas carried Ray inside, following closely behind his older nephew. When they entered, Tekashi whirled around and entered into the family room's toilet on the first floor, located straight ahead from the main doorway. Lucas entered as well, closing the door behind him as he entered with Ray in his arms. A series of slow claps came from the corner of the house to his right, from Hitoshi's office, which garnered his attention as he saw him walk out with a look that almost held pride. "Congratulations, you've arrived before Angel got home," he said as he slowly walked towards him, sounding like he was genuinely happy for him. "Well, really? Oh, thank God. I was psyching myself up for a chewing out of a lifetime," he said as he wiped some actual sweat from his brows. "Tekashi's never gonna shut up about today for a while." Hitoshi laughed as he approached Lucas. "Well, can't stop him from having fun now, am I right? That you are, I think," he said with a chuckle as he took Ray from his uncle's arms. "Oh, and I think you owe me something for this," Hitoshi said as he reached into his pocket and pulled out an album-sized paper fold from his white coat. "What's weight is that?" he asked as he reached forward to grab it with shaky hands brimming with anticipation. The album itself had a bit of an odd image on the front. The terrified face of a man looking downward to the left, whose flesh from his frown and wide-open mouth almost drooped and folded atop one another of his red skin. The creator of the artwork? His style was maybe bold, unique, maybe uncanny. Only a tiny bit embellished on the line work, but it was not any less the eye-catcher. "I had to get my hands really dirty, so you better pay up this time," he lightly chided. "Oh my God, you're right, I do owe you big time," he exclaimed while taking it and pocketing it securely inside his fanny pack. "I'll pay up next time. We meet, okay?" he said as he made his way out of the house but was stopped by his sister entering. "Lucas, you didn't take Tekashi out for a ride, did you?" she asked with a serious tone. "Well, he's in trouble," Ray said in thought with a wince. "That? I did not," he answered nervously. "Now if you don't mind. I have to go." Came Tekashi's groan, lumbering out from the bathroom door. "Ice cream's tasty but bad for the tummy," he chanted over and over again as he slowly made his way towards the couch in the family room to lie down. "Ice cream?" Angel asked quizzically. "What? Brought a bucket of it." "Yeah, that's what it was," he reassured himself as he turned to leave, but his sister would have none of it. "Didn't I tell you to not take Tekashi out for a ride again? Let me guess, you sped your way to town on that death trap of yours. Completely irresponsible," she huffed as she grabbed his shoulders. "I have to worry about work enough already, day and night. And if you're taking the kids out, you know I can't stop thinking about them." Do you know how taxing it is for me? She said with a bit of anger. So if I hear you taking Tekashi or Ray out again, so God help me I dash. Mama, came the voice of a baby. All adults in the room turned to the boy in Hitoshi's arms. Huh. Hitoshi sounded confused. Lucas looked towards Ray with a confused look. Did he just? Ray? Angel asked with surprise and concern. Watching the scene unfold, Ray concluded that the best course of action to calm down his mom was a diversion. Deciding that a good shock was best suited for the task as well as being tired of staying silent whenever anyone except Saki was around. He uttered what was, for them, his first words. And what better way to calm down an angry mother than saying, "Mama," he repeated while reaching towards Angel, his palms opening and closing in rapid succession. See Angel, little Ray here doesn't like it when you're upset like that, Hitoshi stated, first to get over the shock. Ray, Angel uttered before reaching towards her baby. He said his first words. She celebrated as she took him in her arms and started spinning. Say it again. Mama. Yes, that's right. I'm Mama, your Mama, she said as she nuzzled his nose with her own. Ray, meanwhile, was just content that he was able to calm her down. Ray was sitting in his father's office, learning about the intricacy of fusion reactions. 3 years had passed since he began secretly sneaking into his father's office while they were away and gathering knowledge. Interesting. So deuterium-tritium fusion is considered to be the most effective form. Wonder why people don't do it yet, he said with a scoff. Despite having access to technologies such as holographic projection, fusion energy was still a theory in this world. He wagered he could do it right now if he had access to the resources. Maybe with a couple of steady hands to boot. As he sat there, several piles of books and papers were sprawled around the desk. He hoped that Saki would not mind the mess he had made. As his thoughts were on the housemaid, her voice called from the kitchen. Wait, it's time for lunch. She called out from the kitchen, and caused him to stir in his seat. Sitting back slightly, he stretched his arms about before he looked at the clock on the far end of the wall. Seeing that it had indeed been noon, he crawled out of his chair and walked towards the kitchen. Speaking of technology to improve, he had found his father's schematics for a machine. With his limited knowledge, he could deduce that it was some kind of particle accelerator, further proving his suspicion that his father was a scientist of some kind. He had taken the liberty of inspecting and studying the design, and quite frankly, it was impressive. The mechanisms allowed the machine to fire particles close to the speed of light, and if he understood it correctly, was aiming to be able to observe the result in a much more controlled and stable environment than the machines of previous generations. When he made his way into the kitchen, Saki had already prepared his meal for him. He had never been so relieved in his life as much the day he could eat meat again. Sure, after a bit of research, he found out that meat, specifically beef, brought with it a terrible means of sustenance. Plants and other more direct sources being a much more effective means of energy. Animals were an inefficient middleman. He even found out that if humans were to use the area of land they used to grow fodder for animals, as land for growing crops for humans, world hunger could probably be solved proper in like 3 months. But despite all of that, his meals were founded into habits, and it would take a while to change. He would always tell himself that in the future he would be a vegetarian, a proper futurist for humanity, but that day was still a far ways away. The next step from this would be to become completely inorganic, capable of using every joule of energy to its maximum potential. But he liked his humanity, so he chose the next best thing. His meal this evening was a soup made from some kind of meat, diced into tiny cubes. What's this? He asked as he gestured towards his meal. He knew it was meat, just not what kind. Meat from a goat, Saki replied as she sat to his left, eating her own plate full of green. She was vegan, it seemed. Goat, huh? That's new, he mused as he took up a spoonful of the soup, hoping to taste it before indulging in the pieces of meat. This is beef, he commented with a frown as he looked at his soup with a critical eye. Yeah, but notice it's smokier, Saki added, prompting Ray to think for a moment. I suppose it is, he said with a small shrug as the late smell made itself felt. Saki smiled as the boy across from her took another sip, So, you learn anything new today? Saki asked, hoping to start a conversation. Oh, plenty, Ray confirmed with a nod. Like what? Thermonuclear astrophysics, quantum mechanics, behavior of photons in various spaces. I have got to say, learning became a lot more fun than before when, well, learning is fun. Ray had noticed that whatever he read, he could recall the information, seemingly perfectly. A far cry from his previous life of general academic failures. He had tried to test this new advanced memory and recall by reading a page from one of his father's mathematics books. He found that whatever he could read, the numbers and equations and calculations themselves, he could always memorize and remember them all. No matter how complicated, his brain seemed to find a way. Sounds like really, really smart stuff, way beyond my education. Saki commented awkwardly, clearing her throat with her body turning stiff. She had never been one for the sciences, nor did she ever want to be. The boy's drive towards learning had always struck her as especially odd. None of what he read was 2 plus 2 anymore, math so advanced it barely looked like math. Oh, I never asked. What's Dad's job exactly? Ray had seen the blueprints and had concluded that his dad was an engineer of some sort, maybe even a quantum physicist involved in the research they do at his facility. Oh, he's a scientist, Saki answered with a giggle. No, I'm asking what kind of scientist. Ray asked Saki to elaborate with a gesture of his hand, which caused the housemaid's expression to turn flat. There are different kinds? Oh gosh, okay, well, he studies atoms? She said, raising both her hands to make gestures that she wasn't sure of what she talked about. Ray hardly gave out, well, she's no help at all. He said to himself in thought and his face turned flat in expression. Though he supposed he could not judge her too much. She had always been a little bit of an airhead. All right, I'll be going back now, Ray said as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. I'm sorry. Make sure to ask him next time, okay? She said with an apologetic tone. I think I'll ask him myself, Ray said, waving away her concerns. I'll save you the trouble, the boy added with a giggle. You? She asked as she received a bright nod. All right. I'm not sure how you'll bring it up though, she said with a shrug. You know how he is, she quickly took to elaborate when she noticed the boy look at her oddly, if you show that you're the least bit interested in his like of work. He's going to push you to pursue it as much as he can. You sound very sure, has this happened before? Ray dismissively and offhandedly asked in an amused manner, but Saki was completely serious. Yes, she said as she placed a handful of plates in the kitchen sink, and her words tempted Ray to give pause. Ray turned around from the doorway that led into the kitchen in time with Saki opening her mouth. To your older brother? Ray's face was blank at first, but quickly it turned to mild apprehension. Not the apprehension at the thought that his older brother may have been forced at the time to study advanced science, but at the image. Ray had always been accustomed to Tekashi being a sport, so the prospects of his older brother reading away at a textbook while surrounded by a pile of other books while under a dimly lit candle was a very odd picture to him. Ray was still a bit unsettled by his father's seeming drive to push his children in studying, but didn't really have anything to say against it to Saki. So his silence as he walked out of the kitchen was mistaken by Saki as dread. Like the fear was enough to paralyze the poor boy's mouth, but she kept to herself her word of sympathies, keeping to mind that Ray was the type to find inconvenience in pity from others. Ray made his way back to the office, where a multitude of papers and books were laying on the desk. He turned towards the clock, reading that it was about 1:15. That's still more than 3 hours of time, Ray hiffed as he climbed up the chair and sat down, turned to the desk where a dozen books remained sprawled out. He immediately went back to reading. He still had 3 hours before his dad would usually come home, so he was very optimistic to finish reading them all if he read 3 of them at a time. But fate was against his wishes that day, and Hitoshi had actually arrived home just as he sat down. Ray was too engrossed in his readings that he missed the sounds of the front door opening and closing. Saki, the voice of his dad called out from the living room. Ray, after a moment of gathering his thoughts, began frantically putting away his things. Yes? Saki answered from the second-floor landing in the living room. The front door was unlocked. He pointed with his thumb as he hung his coat up beside the door. Very dangerous if a person tried to sneak in, he said as he shuffled around his dark leather briefcase and bags. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll make sure it's always locked then. Saki said with a slight bow. Good. Now where's Ray? He asked and turned right as he made his way towards his office. He's in the... Saki then assumed that Ray had not anticipated that his father would come home this early, and thus would not have put away the books he was reading. Omura-sama, would you like some tea first? She offered. Sure, bring it into the office if you could, he said as he nodded. He was standing at the doorway looking back at her. Why not come to the kitchen? It's much easier for me to clean, she half begged. No, I'm good. I just gonna rest for a little while on the chair for Ray? He asked in confusion as noticed the boy sitting behind his desk, being surrounded by books and neatly stacked papers. Ray looked shocked and stunned, like a criminal having been caught in the act. Right now, he was currently holding a few paper documents in his hand. I can explain. He barely was able to get out before flashing his father a shaky smile. Now what are you doing? Those papers are sensitive, he exclaimed as he marched on over to him. Come on, give it here, he demanded as he took the papers and documents from Ray's hands, leaving the little boy rocking back and forth on his chair. Listen, I know you're interested in stuff like this, but you have to be more careful. He stopped himself as he held the paper to his face. Inspecting it closely, he could not recognize the writings as his own. This isn't mine. He thought for a moment and turned to his son. Did you write this? It was stupid, he admitted to himself, a 3-year-old being able to use formulas from such advanced a field as quantum mechanics. Yes, confirmed Ray meekly, as he shifted his eyes from his father to the table's surface to the many writings. Really? Hitoshi uttered. He was always expecting his children to be smart academically. It ran in the bloodline, after all, Tekashi being no exception. Despite taking a strong liking to sports, he always received great if not perfect marks on his school tests. But for Ray to show this knowledge this vast in mathematics, this early on, it really took him on quite a trip. He then reached into his pocket and took out his phone, dialed in a number and called. After a brief moment of ringing, the person on the other side picked up. Hitoshi? Aren't you supposed to be busy with work right now? Came the mature voice of a woman. Her voice sounded refined and elegant, no doubt belonging to someone in the higher classes of society. Are you? He asked her instead. Am I what? Busy? Oh, not at all, she said with a laugh. If you're planning a visit, my door's right open. I am planning to visit, but just not a simple friendly visit between friends, I'm afraid. What do you mean? She asked, a bit concerned. I was wondering if I could bring my son for an inspection, he explained. Tekashi? Of course, you can bring him over. Though I wonder what could be the problem, she said with a laugh. No, not Tekashi, my younger son. Ray, why, what's wrong? She asked with concern again. Ever since he was born, he has always been, how do I say this? Special, he said with a snap of his fingers. And you want to check for any problems regarding his behavior? She theorized. Yeah, if that's fine with you? Of course. Come on right over, she said jovially. Right, be there in 10, he said as he hung up and put the phone in his pocket. He then turned to Ray. Ray, we're going to a psychiatrist, he announced as he picked him up. Ray looked up and stared wide-eyed at his father. Welcome, Hitoshi, the woman in a neatly made suit with a clipboard in her hands exclaimed. She was a bit shorter than Hitoshi but exceptionally thicker in certain areas. She had fair skin with dark purple hair styled into a bun with a long silver pin running through. A name tag hung on her left breast pocket reading, Dr. Nana. Come on in. Hitoshi with Ray in his arms did as the woman instructed. Sorry to bother you today, Nana-sama, he apologized. Oh, don't be. Now, is this the little guy who's been reading his father's things without his permission, she said as she leaned into Ray's face. Hitoshi cringed at how easily wrong that sentence could be taken. What a handsome little man, she complimented with a delightful laugh. Anyway, shall we? She gestured, lifting the curtain to make way for the father-son duo as they stepped into another room. This room is packed to the brim with machines, The sensation washed over Ray again. He hummed, closing his eyes with a smile on his face as he bobbed his head from side to side. Huh? Questioned the woman, looking up from her clipboard. What's he doing? He does this sometimes, Hitoshi explained. There had been many a time on their outings and trips when he would adorn this expression. Typically in urban environments where technology was abundant. She hummed while nodding with her pen held to her chin. Well, bring him over here. She ushered to the machine she was standing next to. The machine was white with a chair hooked up to it. The chair itself was flat, very similar to a small bed but not quite. Ray was laid on top. Now just stay still, his father instructed. Ray did as he was told. Nana then powered up the machine and the display lit up. On it, the brain waves of Ray were shown. Brain wave functions seem normal. Oh my, Dr. Nana suddenly exclaimed, bringing down her glasses to look at the monitor with her eyes before she pushed them back up. Omura Hitoshi's son, Ray. His neurological activity was off the charts. Every part of his brain seemed to be firing nonstop. The waves were lighting up beautifully like Christmas lights, echoing across the surface while Nana heard the dings of bells in her head as she looked at it. What's wrong? Hitoshi asked with slight worry as he made his way over to her. Bending down to gaze at the display of the machine, he suddenly became wide-eyed as he was left slack-jawed. Again, he had always expected his children to be smart. But Ray was on a wholly different level. He would not have believed any of this had he not seen it with his own eyes. Dad, is something wrong? Ray asked in a worried tone from where he laid on the chair. No, everything is fine. He told him before leaning back in to look at the screen that displayed his neural activity with a wild smile. More than fine. Hitoshi, with a brain like his, the capacity for intelligence is staggering, Nana said with a shell-shocked expression. Your son could change the world. Come on, that's actually plausible now that I think about it. If his son's brain activity was this insane now, he could only imagine what it would be like when he grows up. Has he showed it by any chance? Nana turned back to look at the monitor, typing a few things on the computer, signs of higher thinking. Well, he has been able to memorize the old phone book? Hitoshi looked up to the ceiling in thought. Figures. She snorted while her head dropped. He turned back down to regard her with an almost offended frown, failing to catch what she found funny. What is that supposed to mean? Your son's a savant, Toshi. It means he's good at logical thinking, objective reasoning, and it sounds like he has quite the memory. Hitoshi's face morphed into one of confusion when she told him the case of his son. Has he shown any traits like autistic behavior? Compulsive or uncompulsive tendencies? She took up the board on her lap into her hands and started writing on it with her pen. Hey, Nana-sama. You're a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. I have a degree in psychology, she interrupted defensively while holding the hand with the pen to her hips. My master's, remember, she changed her tone to one a bit huffy, and Hitoshi rolled his eyes a little. Well, Hitoshi grumbled when the memory came back to him, and his posture deflated while his hand that was grabbing onto Nana's chair fell to his side. I suppose? He looked at the monitor that showed Ray's brain. If Ray were to take up engineering, the improvements he could make to society were almost limitless. I'd like to run a few tests. Hitoshi was snapped out of his thoughts by a request from Nana. Like what tests? I want to know the limits of his tiny little brain. Hitoshi looked up from the display towards Ray, who gave him a puzzled expression in return, staying stiff to remain completely still on his padded bed. He looked back to Nana and saw her look at him expectantly. She looked like she was excited to examine the boy, and to be perfectly honest, Hitoshi was as well. He was curious himself to the extent of Ray's brilliance. Okay, don't push him too hard just yet, ease into it if you can. Remaining silent for a moment, Nana smiled and quickly gave an ecstatic nod. She got up from her seat and went to pick the boy up, practically prancing around the table over to the padded bed. Now Ray, you're going to have to come with me to that room. She pointed to a door on the east side of the room. We're going to play a few games, okay? She asked with a smile. All right? Ray said in a voice that sounded not completely convinced. Picking him up in her arms, She made her way over to the door on the wall opposite to the tall glass windows that overlooked the city. How long will it take, Nana-sama? The tall woman turned around and saw that Hitoshi was looking at the clock with a frown, appearing to be in a bit of a hurry. Just a few moments. Do you have somewhere to go? Yeah, have to pick up Tekashi from his soccer practice at about 3:30. He explained with a slightly nervous laugh as he sort of expected her answer to be that they were indeed going to take long. Then we'll be out before 3:20, she stated as she walked into the room. Now, both Ray and Nana were sitting at a table, facing each other. A fairly big cardboard box to her side. She opened it and took out some cards. Now Ray, take a look at this paper. She held it out. On it there were 3 equations. The first equation was of a yellow flower being added to a red flower, subtracted by a blue flower that equated to the number 9. Basically elementary algebra with different colors of flowers. The second equation was a red flower plus a blue flower again equating to a 19. The third was a yellow flower minus a yellow flower plus a blue flower equating to 5. Now Ray, I want you to tell me what the flowers amount to individually. The red one is 7, the yellow one is 8, and the blue one is 5. He answered after a bit of a delay. The flowers were really distracting placeholders. Very good, now how about this? She showed him another sheet. This time instead of flowers, it was the sun, the moon, and the earth. And instead of simple addition and subtraction, it was addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Can you divide? She asked him, receiving a nod. Deciding that if he knew division, he would know multiplication as well, she ushered him to continue. After a bit more evaluating, the sun is 13, the moon is 7, and the earth is 42. He stated with a confident smile. Wow, that was fast. She placed another paper and the boy would give him the answer a beat after reading through it. After a while, she was left with her jaw hanged due to how fast he was at mathematical equations. Ray had aced every test in record time. Coming over her shock, she then reached into the box and took out a small book. She placed it on the table, facing Ray. Now Ray, I'm going to open this, and you will tell me everything you see, okay? She held it out and with a flip, the book's first page was opened. Ray immediately recognized it to be a Rorschach test book once he saw the perfectly symmetrical images. Can you tell me what you see? Nana asked from across the table, intently waiting for his answer. I see a butterfly, though it's hard not to. He thought that was all he could see when he began to notice as it seemed to shift. And a human pelvis and a dragonfly shedding its skin, and a blue flower blooming out. Can see. I think that's a street in London, a red bus is driving by. He continues, seeing colors even though it was black and white. That's Hyde, he's a middle-aged high school dropout. He's contemplating whether or not to kill himself right now, I think. He explained as he pointed at a random spot on the image. And she's Annie Calhoun. She's a fashion designer, a graduate of Harvard. Engaged to Travis Key. So of a software company called Linent. He said as he shifted his finger on a different spot, seemingly making up a story as he went. He shifted again, this time glaring at the paper for some reason. That's Billy LaRue. He's a serial killer responsible for the death of 13 people. He stated. He shifted again, this time his expression softening. And that's Bill, he's an elephant. His owner, Shikaku, found him when he was just a baby alone in the woods. He took him home, raised him, and now he helps his owner make money by doing acts. They're good friends, he said with a smile. He was hauled out of his thoughts by the book suddenly being taken away. He shook his head, blinking before looking up at a very startled woman. Moving on, she said with a gulp. Ray, after he realized that he was monologuing about a story he got from the image, began to think, how did I do that? He asked alarmed as he looked at the small book Dr. Nana had put away. Then it hit him. The only plausible reason could be creativity. He nodded with his mouth in the shape of an. He had no idea it would have even worked the way it did. Nana then took out a picture, a very chaotic picture. Not that the picture depicted a chaotic event, it was just really busy. There seemed to be something going on in every corner. The image itself showed a jungle with a treehouse present in the center. Animals of a wide variety of species were present everywhere. The treehouse itself seemed overrun with vegetation. Green grew here and there. A bridge leading up to it was made of rope and wooden planks. Two people, a man and a woman who seemed to be the owners of the treehouse, were walking across it. Now I want you to make a story from this picture. Like before? Yes, like before, she confirmed with a firm nod. Ray then intently looked at the picture. After a while, he began to tell a story. A story of how these people had to build this treehouse in order to survive the jungle. It was a very engaging story, one that he took about half an hour to finish narrating. Very good. You have quite the imagination, you know that? She complimented as she packed up the things on the table into the box. Is that all? Ray asked in a hopeful tone. Just one more. She then took out a few cards. Before showing it to him. The first one she showed had numbers that went up to 10 individual digits. Memorize that? Ray did as he was told. She then took the card from his view and placed it face down on the table. Think you can recite it? She asked, but truth be told, she already knew he could do that. 5, 3, 6, 2, 7, 5, 9, 1, 4, 8. He recite from memory, not stopping for a single moment. Very good. Now say it backwards. 8, 4, 1, 9, 5, 7, 2, 6, 3, 5. He recited. Nana nodded, then took another card. This time the card contained 20 digits. How many more? He questioned with a bit of a whine, not really thrilled by the prospect of doing this same task for what could be well over 10 minutes. We're going to do this until you can't anymore, she stated as she gave him an encouraging smile. Wow. He muttered under his breath apprehensively before turning to memorizing the numbers again. When they were done, Nana picked the boy up and walked out of the room. When they arrived, they were greeted with the sleeping form of Hitoshi sprawled on the waiting room couch. After clearing her throat to gain his attention, he stirred before bolting up. You're done? How did it go? He asked excitedly as he took his coat from the chair beside him. Oh, it went wonderful, she answered as she passed him his son. May I ask how much? Hitoshi said as he took out his wallet. Don't you dare, she said as she forced his hand down. Consider this a favor. Besides, I had so much fun dealing with this little handsome boy, she said as she leaned down and pinched his cheeks. Much to the opposition of Ray. Thank you, Nana-sama. With that, he turned to leave. He stepped out the front door and onto the streets. How much was it anyway? He questioned as he turned around. I said don't worry about it, dash. No, I mean his IQ. How much was it? He elaborated, looking towards her with an intriguing look. Oh, she let out in realization, before giving him a smile that was almost smug. I don't know, she said pleasantly as she closed the door shut, leaving Hitoshi standing there in silence with Ray in his arms. You don't know? He mumbled in confusion before looking at the boy in his arms. Pass it here. A boy with white spiky hair called out as he ran beside another boy with messy blue hair. Here. The one dribbling the ball said before kicking it, sending it rolling to his friend who was running beside him. The boy then took the ball in his possession before running past the defense of the opposing teams. A teammate following closely behind. This teammate was Tekashi. Tekashi whistled, signaling for the white-haired boy to pass him the ball. When he did, Tekashi received it before kicking as hard as he could towards the goal. It curved slightly in the air as it sailed before landing, just barely entering the goal post. The slow whistle rang out courtesy of the coach sounded out, signaling the end of the game. The opposing team's goalkeeper then fell to the ground in a prostrate position, taking mild sadness from their loss. Tekashi walked up to the boy before poking him lightly on the shoulder, to which the boy looked up. Hey, there's always next week. He cheered him up as he offered him a hand. With a smile, he took it and allowed himself to be lifted up. I still have no idea how you can do the curve thing, he commented. The curve thing? Tekashi asked as they made their way to the stands. Yeah, the ball. When you kick it, he explained. Oh that, well I don't know how I do it too, it just happens, he said while rubbing the back of his head, a bit embarrassed that he couldn't provide a suitable answer. Hey, Isn't that your dad? He said as he pointed towards the stands. Tekashi looked up and saw that his dad had in fact arrived to pick him up. He also had a wired strap around his body, not too dissimilar to a backpack. Just in time. He smiled as he said before breaking into a jog. Tekashi, as he ran up towards him, he heard the voice of his little brother. Ray? He questioned with a bewildered grunt as he arrived. Looking up to see his father turn to him with a beckoning look, Tekashi stalked around him, noticing the backpack-like straps on his body. When he came around, he saw that Ray was held to Hitoshi's back via a carrier attached to a harness. His hands and legs dangling off while his head stuck out the top of the holding basket. Ray turned to greet his brother with a smile but retracted it immediately when he saw Tekashi begin to crack up, clearly in amusement. What's this? The boy pointed at the contraption strapped to his father's back. Oh, just something I found in the shopping district? His father elaborated as he jerked his head behind. It seemed fun. He said with a gleeful smile. It looks convenient. He gave his compliments to the design, enabling a person to carry around a child, like a backpack. But what about fun? Little brother, having fun in there? He asked in sly as he made his way over to him. It's okay, Ray stated not too enthusiastically. It sure was nice, but the humiliation of it all clouded his mind. All too kidsy for your liking? He leaned in towards his brother's face with a laugh. Can we go? I think we should go. Dad? Ray said as he bounced up and down on his carrier. Duh, all right. His father nodded before turning to leave to the parking space outside the field. Bye, Tekashi. The boy he was walking with from earlier called out. Bye. He shouted back. Just how many friends do you have? Hitoshi questioned. His eldest son seemed to have friends wherever they went. I don't know. I'm sure it's many, but I don't know exactly how many. Truth be told, Hitoshi was a bit envious of his son. When he was his age, he could not even strike up a conversation with anyone. But he was still happy for him nonetheless. So, why'd you bring Ray? Tekashi pointed out. We went to the psychiatrist, he said as he got in their car. To do what? Tekashi got in the car too. Well, we did some tests. And the results? He asked as he now sat in the passenger seat. Well, believe it or not, he may be smarter than me, Hitoshi said with a smile. Tekashi's face remained stoic for a moment before his eyes suddenly widened. Turning his sights to the back seat towards his 3-year-old brother who remained snugly secured on his little carrier. He had also known his brother was a cut above the rest. He had always wagered that he was smarter than all the students in his school, including himself, despite not even being old enough to attend. But being smarter than his father, who was a nationally renowned scientist. It seemed a little too far a stretch. You're kidding, right? Tekashi asked with a laugh, an uneasy laugh. No, I'm quite serious when I say that, his father replied in a flat tone. No way, he drawled out while giving his father a light nudge on the shoulder. It's true. If you don't believe me, you will when we get home, he said with a grin. Ray, is he telling a lie? Tekashi asked his little brother, looking back to where he sat. I don't know, Ray answered truthfully, though not too enthusiastically. He had heard that children of great intelligence were sent to facilities where they could properly exercise their minds. And he did not look forward to it that much. Dad? Ray called out. Yes? I can still go to a normal school, right? He asked with distress plain in his tone. A normal school? But why would you dash? He stopped whatever he wanted to say when he took a glance at the rearview mirror. His son looked all sad and gloomy. But, well, if we sent you to a college or university right now instead, we could vastly improve your chances at life. He pleaded. Tekashi looked at his father with a shocked expression. Isn't that a bit much? He questioned. But I don't want to do that, Ray said. I would have to go and do experiments surrounded by adults. I'm not sure I even want to pursue a career as a scientist or an engineer, he explained. But you seemed so interested in the blueprints of my machines. His father reasoned. I want to be a hero, Ray suddenly said. You want to be a hero? His father was confused. What could push his child to want to pursue the life of a hero? Why? Because Ray tried to find a reason, but couldn't see any sort of drive other than a whim. A decision he made without a source or cause. I want to help people. He lied. You want to help people? Heh. He laughed. Tekashi, why do you want to play soccer? He questioned his brother instead. Me? Well, because I want to, it's fun, I meet great people and I can earn money for the family if I became a pro. He announced without a trace of hesitance. So Ray, as you can see, you don't have to have a good reason other than that you want to. A professional soccer player is not too different from a professional hero. One is just much more dangerous, that's all. His father stated as he laughed. Did he know I was lying? Ray asked himself. But isn't it good to have a reason? He asked as he looked at his hands. I don't know if it's good to have a reason or not to do something noble. Hitoshi quickly responded, but Ray, you're going to do most things better than most people. And most things worse. But it's great if you want to use your gifts for the benefit of others. Like you? Ray referred to his father using his own brilliance for the betterment of mankind through science. Yes, but what I'm saying right now is that you don't have to have a reason to help an old lady cross the road or save a person from being mugged in an alleyway. That should be your moral obligation to help, even if it doesn't concern you. That's the ideal not only a hero but a good person should have. He explained with a smile. Huh. The little boy's face became contemplative as his eyes turned to the side. He's right. Just look at your brother. Tekashi, if you see a kid being bullied, would you stand idly by or intervene? He asked. Intervene. Like Uncle Lucas does. He answered earnestly. He always remembered that whenever his uncle saw him being bullied, he would always confront them. Because that's the right thing to do. Hitoshi added with a nod. Both of what his father and his brother said left him contemplating on their trip home. Saki. Tekashi called out with a smile as he went to hug her. Oof dash, she grunted as Tekashi smothered her in a hug. Now Tekashi, be careful when you go to hug people, his father reprimanded him. Tekashi had always been a hugger, but he was a growing boy, and he was bigger than Saki now, which meant he had to be careful about his strength. Sorry, he said as he loosened his grip on the housemaid. He then ran inside the house, no doubt to take a shower before dinner. Saki, Hitoshi called out. Take care of Ray for a bit while I change, he said as he began to loosen his tie with one hand, the other holding Ray's carrier to her. Right? She said as she took it. Hitoshi then went inside the house. Saki making no movements to go in yet. So, the secret's out now, right? Saki asked Ray. Yup. He confirmed. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him from entering the office when he did. She apologized. No, it's okay. He waved it off. They were gonna know eventually. Saki stared at the little boy for a moment. Can you let me down? He requested with a bit of a pleading to his voice. Being carried around like a baby was damaging his pride. Sure, she laughed as she set the carrier on the ground before taking him out. Thank you, he said as he began walking inside himself. Saki was following closely behind, and when they got inside, Ray then immediately went to the kitchen. You don't want to take a shower first? Saki asked. No, I don't. Hey, what's for dinner? The usual, she answered from the door, walking into the kitchen to prepare for them. There was not much in the fridge today. Maybe it's time I tell Mr. Hitoshi or Madam Angel to restock. She mused while looking up at the ceiling. Can I ask you something? Ray suddenly spoke out, helping her prepare the table as best he could. Oh, of course, anything. Do you think I can be a hero? He asked, stopped in place and looked to the side. A hero? She asked as she looked up from her work to face him. He had never shown that he wanted to be one before, but who was she to stop a child from dreaming? Oh, I think you'll make a wonderful hero, Ray. She gave an earnest answer, but the boy seemed to be uncertain at first. Really? He asked wide-eyed as if he did not believe she would consider him great for the job. Really? She said as she gave him a smile, reaching out to squeeze his cheeks and shake him slightly. After a moment of Ray's protests, him waving his arms to deter her hand, she pulled back and laughed as he got annoyed. But after he calmed down, he giggled a little at first before joining her with a delightful laugh. Oh! Tekashi exclaimed as he caught a whiff of the scent coming from the kitchen. Saki and Ray looked up from their work to see his older brother coming into the kitchen. "I love everything about that smell," he commented as he made his way towards them. "How was soccer practice?" Saki asked him. Oh, it was great. I even made a couple of new friends too," he said joyfully, waving his arms about wide while holding a large measuring spoon for the soup. "You're such a social butterfly." Ray made the comment a bit impressed and a little envious. He hoped that he would share this trait with his brother soon, as he was starting school at about a year from now. Provided if he had successfully convinced his father to let him attend in the first place. "Ah, you're making me blush," Tekashi waved off the compliment. "Besides, I think you'll make plenty of friends when you go to school yourself," he assured his brother. "That's right. Ray, you're going to be starting school next year, right?" Saki asked from across the table. "Don't know," he said. The preparations at the table were finished and the three were taking their seats. "What do you mean?" Saki looked at him with her brows creased, a bit concerned. "Well, I'm not sure he's keen on letting me go to a normal one." His expression was a bit sad while his head tilted loosely to the side. "Oh, what are you talking about?" "Of course, he'll let you attend if that's what you really want," Tekashi said with a cheerful voice before attempting to dig in on his meal, only to be stopped by Saki when she slapped his wrist, inciting a small yelp from the older boy. "Why would he not let you attend, Ray?" she asked as she shifted her attention back to Ray. Ray said nothing before he raised his hand up to his head, index finger held up, pointing to his temple. Saki thought for a moment before immediately realizing that he was referring to his more than gifted intellect, her face mirroring her thoughts. Hitoshi suddenly entered the kitchen, now dressed in a casual outfit whose blue shirt was most noticeable as it stood out from the creamy white walls of the dining room. It seemed he mustered up enough willpower to step out of the white coat he always wore for work, having a habit of never taking it off even while at home. "What are you guys talking about?" he asked curiously, having heard a bit of the conversation from the living room coming down the stairs. "Dad, you're not gonna force Ray to go to some special facility because of his smarts, right?" Tekashi asked his father with an uneasy expression. "What? No, of course no." He shook his head rapidly with his mouth curving down. "He's made it quite clear to me that he doesn't want to go. And even if it makes me sad, I won't force our little Ray," he explained with a smile almost flat. Walking up to the table, he sat down beside them. "See?" Tekashi smiled brightly as he turned to his brother beside him, Ray having an almost empty look on his face from the announcement. "You all waited for me?" Hitoshi noticed their sticks and spoons still at the side of their plate. "It would be impolite if we didn't," Saki said with a nod, paying her respects along with the brothers and dug in with them. Hitoshi looked for a moment and shrugged with a happy chuckle. Turning to his meal, he paid his respects himself and ate along with the others,